Get roll call, please.
Vice Chair Stenfield.
Here.
Member Bagwell. Member Henderson.
Here.
Member McQuarrie.
Here.
Member Nosad. No, it's not here. Okay. Member Schutte.
Here.
Member Terry.
Here.
Ex officio member Rosenberg.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Thank you. For the agenda, are there any changes to the agenda tonight?
No changes from staff.
Okay, thank you. Any disclosures from any member of CAMPO? I'll take that as none. We'll go to public comment. Desi, do we have any public comment?
I see no public comment, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Lori? Is this a place in the agenda where you'd like to do your thing?
Very much.
You're welcome.
So it's just such an honor how long I have served with this individual, but we really wanted to take a moment to say thank you. And it's just the right thing to do. And so we have a plaque for Mark Kimbrough in appreciation for his 6 years of distinguished service to the Carson City Regional Transportation Commission and the Carson Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. Your ideas and guidance have improved the quality of life for drivers, bikers, walkers, runners, bus riders, and all other movers and shakers like yourself. And so we just really wanted to take a moment to thank you, Mark. You've just been a wonderful asset to the community and really provided great insights and worked very hard on behalf of everyone. And so I just want to say thank you even personally.
You shouldn't have given me that opportunity. So no, thank you, Lori. It's been a privilege to be on this board. You know, that's one of the things I love about Carson City. I've sat on, this is my third board, hoping for a fourth, that you allow the public to be a part of the decision-making and part of the politics of running a city the way it should be with public input and a voice from many different groups. So I just really appreciate that opportunity, and Carson City's been really good to me and had many opportunities for people to be a part of this community. Thanks to the leadership too, that's all become part of it. So thank you for that, and I will miss this board. It's a get stuff done board, but we gotta get this tax situation squared away or the roads are gonna fall apart on us. So, and I'll be an advocate for that at any time when we get to that point again. So thank you.
We're going to remember it. It's recorded.
That's right.
Mark. Staying, or let me get this plaque.
I'm off salary now. I'm out of here.
Not that kind.
Does anybody else have anything to say to Mark?
Yeah, this
Yeah.
is Sandra. I would just like to add that, Mark, I've enjoyed working with you over the years, both on this board as well as in other capacities. You've just always been an advocate and just a very reasonable voice in whatever board you serve on, and we look forward to seeing you in whatever capacity going forward. Thank you so much.
And this is Chaz, and I would really like to echo those sentiments, and I'm sure we'll continue working on trails around Carson City and the eastern front of the Sierra, Mark. So thank you for your many years of service.
And I guess I'll be did you want to say anything? No, ladies first.
Well, I'll just add on behalf of staff, and we've talked offline, Mark, but you've been an active and committed and fair board member in a way that has really been an inspiration to staff, and we're really going to miss you. So thanks for all you've contributed to the board.
And I guess I'll be the last one to say it's been a pleasure. And I'm sure we'll see each other again, biking and such. I was getting a little choked up there. You and I have this commonality together that, quite frankly, sucks, but we do. But it's been a pleasure to be your co-chair, at least this last year. And I wish you every bit of luck in your new endeavors on the Open Sports Board, I guess, is the one you want to get on. But anyway, it's been a pleasure, so I want to thank you. Does anybody else have a comment? If not, then we'll move on to item 5, approval of the minutes. You get a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes of December 9, 2020 as submitted.
Have a second?
I'll second that.
Right, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? It carries. Okay, I guess this moves us on to item 6A for possible action, discussion and possible action to nominate and elect a chairperson and vice chairperson for the CAMPO board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lucia Maloney, Transportation Manager. Staff recommends two-year terms for the newly elected chairperson and vice chairperson for calendar years 2021 and 2022, commencing immediately. Any member of CAMPO may hold either of these positions. And with that, I'll open it up for discussion and direction from the board.
Do we have nominations for chair and vice chair? Oh, Lori?
I'd like to nominate for the chairperson, Greg Stedfield. He's been doing a super job and been vice chair for years, so I think he'll be ready to lead us.
Any second on that?
Oops, I second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, I guess I'm the chairman. Now, as far as vice chair, do we have any nominations for vice chair?
I would like to nominate member Lori Bagwell for vice chair.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 And just for the record, these are two-year terms pursuant to the recommendation of staff.
Understood.
Oh.
Well, then I guess the motion carries, and I'm the chair, and you're the vice chair.
So you have to show up for every meeting.
All right, moving on to 6B, for discussion only, presentation and discussion regarding the CAMPO, its roles and responsibilities, and upcoming activities for new members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lucia Maloney, Transportation Manager. The purpose of this presentation is to provide new members with information about CAMPO's purpose, role, and authority, and to serve as a refresher for those that have been on this board for a while. There's a lot of information in the staff report. I'm going to hit on it at a high level, but please feel free to interrupt at any time with questions, or if I'm lingering on something and you'd like me to speed up, I can do that too. Exhibit 1 in your staff report included a PowerPoint, and I'm going to go through that first to provide an overview of what CAMPO is and what we do and how everything fits together. Carson Area MPO was formed in 2003, and we are responsible for metropolitan transportation planning for Carson City urbanized area. So that includes Carson City, Western Lyon County, and Northern Douglas County. We're staffed by Carson City Public Works employees, and our policy board consists of 2 Carson City Board of Supervisor members, 3 at-large Carson City members, 1 Douglas County member, 1 Lyon County member, and 1 ex officio non-voting member from NDOT. And that NDOT member, Sandra Rosenberg, she is invaluable. As staff, we work very closely with Federal Highways and Nevada Department of Transportation. And so having her at the table to advise and participate is a really valuable piece, even though that member is non-voting. Our primary responsibilities are that metropolitan transportation planning processes in cooperation with the state DOT and transit operators as well. We have a proactive public involvement process with an approved public participation plan, and we cooperatively develop, update, and approve 3 key documents. These are required documents: a regional transportation plan, a transportation improvement program, and a unified planning work program. And all of that is depicted graphically, on this slide. Can you all see the slides?
Mm-mm.
Why are you seeing the mountains? Excuse me.
But a nice picture of the mountains it is.
It was displaying before the meeting. Give me just a moment. Yeah. Victory. Okay, excuse me. And this is depicted graphically on that slide shown on the screen, where we have the regional transportation plan on the far left. This is our long-range planning framework. We have our TIP, our Transportation Improvement Program, on the right. This is that short-range funding document. We have a unified planning work program on the top and performance planning on the bottom. And I'm going to go into more detail on that now. All of that is bracketed in the yellow by public participation, which is really the cornerstone of everything we do. The Regional Transportation Plan is a required document. MPOs are required to do this. It's the long-range, 20-plus year planning period for what we're doing here in the Carson metropolitan area. It must be updated every 4 to 5 years and developed in accordance with federal requirements. And it is required to be a performance-based planning framework. So we have goals, objectives, performance measures, targets, and that's informing everything we do for the next 20 to 30 years. The 2040 Regional Transportation Plan was approved in August of 2016, and the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan will be considered for approval later this evening. So that's on the left, that's the RTP, the vision, the long-range vision. Now we're going to talk about the short range and how that fits into the Transportation Improvement Program, which is our prioritized listing of transportation improvement projects with a very short 4-year horizon period. This document must be updated every 4 years, consistent with that long-range regional transportation plan, and must include all regionally significant or federally funded projects. Again, it must be fiscally constrained, so include projects where funding is reasonably expected to be secured. The Nevada Department of Transportation developed an E-STIP platform. So our regional TIP rolls up into the state TIP, the STIP. And that's presented on an online platform. The link is shown on the slide where you can see all of the regionally significant projects in the state. It's a fantastic tool and it's really transparent for the public and available to everyone. CAMPO's 2018 to 2021 federal fiscal year's TIP was approved in August of 2017. And you can anticipate to see our next TIP in the next month or two once we approve the RTP and get that long-range set of projects. So we've looked at the long range with the RTP, we've looked at the short range with the TIP, and now we're going to talk about how we get there and what staff do day to day with the Unified Planning Work Program. The UPWP, we take a 3 C's approach to comprehensive planning with the 3 C's are continuous, comprehensive, and cooperative. It doesn't work without the 3 C's. The UPWP has a 1 to 2 year horizon period. In the past few years, we've done a 2-year document. This is because we don't have very much funding as CAMPO. We're a pretty small urban area. And so by allowing us to plan our work program in 2 years, it gives us the opportunity to kind of plan for some of those bigger ticket planning items and help us better manage our funds that way. The budget for our federal fiscal year 21 and 22 UPWP, which was approved in May of 2020, is shown in that tiny table on the screen. We have about $440,000 a year. Included in your packet is information on local match. So the UPWP is funded with 95% consolidated planning grant funding, which requires a 5% local match. The 5% local match is distributed based on population of the 2010 census across Carson City, Douglas, and Lyon County. The local share for fiscal year 21, so our current fiscal year, is $22,014 distributed in that table shown in the packet. So we've looked at the long range, the short range, the day-to-day guiding document of what staff are working on. And then I'm going to hit on performance planning. So again, our regional planning framework is guided by performance-based planning with goals, objectives, measures, and targets. So staff monitor all those things, all of the data, how is our system being used, who's using it, where are they going, and that is all done in this performance-based framework. It's implemented concurrently and funded by the UPWP, and the outputs feed into our long and short range planning. This is our quantitative piece of decision-making. We started with a Complete Streets Performance Monitoring Report back in 2015, and this was kind of the first really documented what we're monitoring, what we're doing. This was expanded into a performance measurement program with our first monitoring report in fall of 2019. A second one was just presented a couple months ago here to CAMPO in fall of 2020. And we anticipate providing that annual monitoring report. I think it's really valuable for you and the public to see how we're doing. So we'll do that annually. So now you've seen how all the pieces fit together, and again, that's bracketed by public participation. We have an approved public participation plan. It was amended in July 2012 and then more recently amended in January of 2019. In it, there are requirements for timelines for public posting, and it explains how and when we engage the public for our different documents and requirements that we do. We do have a Transportation Resource Advisory Forum for Carson City. There's a Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee and various working groups for public participation plan amendments, transit planning, the RTP. So we try to engage them as much as possible. Some of those groups are have a varying level of interaction and engagement, and quite frankly, we're a very small community. And so over the next year or two, staff are looking at revamping how we engage our stakeholders, maybe consolidating some of those smaller groups, making it more impactful as we start talking about some of these bigger ticket items and long-range policy making for how we fund our transportation system. I will also mention, and I know this is CAMPO, but Carson City Connect is an online tool. It's touted as kind of that 24/7 city hall. And even if there are residents of Douglas or Lyon County, I do want to throw it out there that they're welcome to submit tickets in Carson City Connect related to CAMPO. For transportation issues, those come directly to staff, to me or a member of the transportation team. And those are responded to by us within 24 hours, and that's a fantastic way to get a hold of staff and really provide pictures, provide comments, help us understand what's going on out there. Regarding timeline, the dates on this chart aren't super critical, but I did want to show how it's iterative. So the RTP happens every 4 years, so 2016, 2020, 2024. The TIP then falls behind that with the short range, so 2017, 2021, 2025. The UPWP is shown here every 2 years, 2016, 2018, 2020. And performance monitoring, where we did sort of a longer period in the past, we're now doing it every year, right? So it's all iterative and it all fits together. And so you'll start seeing, the longer you're on these boards, you'll start seeing kind of the same documents come over and over again, sort of on a rolling basis. And throughout that, of course, is public participation. I would be remiss if I didn't mention one of the key tools that we use to analyze and understand transportation in CAMPO, and that's our travel demand model. We maintain it regularly and update it regularly with latest and greatest available data. You can think of our model as a sort of a program within what's called TransCAD as a software. It's very high level and it's a regional forecasting tool, and I can't stress that enough. Key data inputs that we looked at to update the model for our 2050 RTP that you'll hear later today are socio-demographic data. So that's the who is traveling, right? Who lives here in CAMPO? Are they workers? Are they students? Are they empty nesters? Zoning, so that's the where, right? Where are people coming from in the morning and where are they going? That's zoning, that's the master plans for Carson City, Douglas, and Lyon counties. And then the transportation network, right? How do we connect the who with the where? That's the roads and our network. For the model year for the 2050 RTP, we selected base years of 2020, which is our current year, and future years of 2030 and 2050. Staff participate in a statewide planning executive group discussions where leaders in transportation from around the state meet monthly, and we selected these years in coordination with that group. So a little more detail, where are the trips? So zoning in the master plan, we think of bed base as trip origins, so where people wake up in the morning, right? Where are the residential units? And then where are people going? They're going to work, they're going to school, they're making discretionary trips, and those are your trip destinations. So that's all influenced by the master plan and the zoning. The higher the density residential, the more trips that are going to be generated in the morning. The higher the density commercial, the more trips that are generated in those destinations. And then the who is making the trips. So sociodemographics matter. Number of households. Is it single-family households, multifamily households? Again, that's that density. But household size. Households that have children make more trips, right, than households that don't. Household vehicles and household income are also predictors of travel. More income generally leads to more discretionary trip making. More vehicles lead to more discretionary trips and more use of vehicles, whereas households that are transit dependent are more limited in where they go during the day. Employment locations impact distance of trips, how long people spend in the car, and schools and school-aged children, as I mentioned, influence those peak hour drop-off and pickup times for school trips. We look to national guidance for trip making, trip generation. There's a national household travel survey that provides information that's fed into our model on how to distribute trips through the network. And we look at that socioeconomic strata that I mentioned. And then how are trips being made? I did want to touch on this in this presentation, that our transportation network, our roads, you'll hear the term functional classification. So each road is classified, and that gets from CAMPO staff up to a recommendation from NDOT, and then eventually approved by Federal Highway Administration. There are local roads. Generally, you can think of local roads as trips by your house, where the number of cars are really your neighbors. Those are the people using those roads. Collector roadways are those bigger roads. So how do you get out of your neighborhood? You get onto a collector and it collects you to the bigger roads. And then arterials and freeways. This is the higher volumes, bigger roads where you're getting to work, getting where you need to go. So the takeaways from the model is it is robust. It's our quantitative forecasting tool, but it is very high level, and again, it's used for regional estimations. We don't look at conceptual development projects, and we don't look at individual intersections. So that would be a different analysis. And our outputs are only as good as the inputs. So a good model relies on cross-departmental coordination and regular updates. So we do that to the best of our abilities. So next steps on CAMPO, the 2050 RTP adoption, which is anticipated later this evening. The Transportation Improvement Program, so then the short-range document coming to you in the next couple of months. And ongoing performance monitoring. For those that are new, one of the takeaways of our monitoring report this past one was that staff really want to look at improving the monitoring and reporting of non-motorized modes. What are our bikes and peds doing, and how do we justify those investments we're making, and how do we prioritize that investment? And then other activities within the approved UPWP. So that concludes the big picture. Before I go into the other exhibits, I did want to ask if there were any questions or comments. Excellent. So with that, I'm going to pull up Exhibit 2, which is the UPWP. This is the approved document. I won't go through the whole thing, but I did want to draw your attention to the very last page of the UPWP, which consolidates activities that are going to be conducted this fiscal year and next fiscal year, along with the 2-year budget for those. And in this table, you can see milestones. So these are actual, why can't you see it? Excuse me. Well, that's a shame. So I will draw your attention to page 30, the last page of Exhibit 2. And that has this table that I'm talking about, which is all of the milestones and the expected dates that will complete those milestones. And so when you have a chance to look through that UPWP, if you're looking to really get the consolidated takeaway, it's that last page of Exhibit 2. And you can find that on packet page number 59. Before I move on, are there any questions on the Unified Planning Work Program? Fantastic. Next, I will speak to Exhibit 3, which is the RTC Campo Board of Supervisors Interlocal Agreement that is obviously not showing on your screen. The takeaways from Exhibit 3, I did want to point to, and these are on packet page, it starts on packet page 61 for this interlocal agreement. And this agreement is relevant for CAMPO members, but also for RTC members because it really outlines the relationship between the Board of Supervisors, the Carson City Board of Supervisors, CAMPO, and RTC. There's a section starting on the first page of the agreement that says CAMPO agrees. So CAMPO agrees to operate and manage the MPO for the Carson City area. You know that, we've talked about that. CAMPO agrees to conduct the transportation planning process as required by federal regulations and complete those documents that I mentioned in the PowerPoint. CAMPO agrees to coordinate the planning process and the development of necessary documents with the city, with the DOT, with other counties, with private agencies, and with related tribes. CAMPO agrees to prepare and submit necessary planning documents, satisfy federal requirements, utilize professional, technical, and clerical staff as provided by the city, and I'll get to that in a moment, and to act as the designated recipient for Federal Transit Administration funds. So the funds to fund the Jump Around Carson transit system are directly received by CAMPO, by the FTA, and so that's a key piece that CAMPO gets that transit money. The agreement also outlines the city agrees, and so I did want to highlight that the city does delegate specific authority to RTC in number 2 of that agreement, and so because of that, RTC is able to operate with this delegated authority that's unique to RTC, so I would draw your attention there. The city agrees to provide local match dollars for Jump Around Carson Transit in number 3. On that city agrees section, and the city agrees to provide the staff for CAMPO in number 5 of that section. So those are the kind of the key pieces of why and how we operate and how that all fits together. Now that I've really lulled you into submission, I will hit on Exhibit 4 of the staff report, which I included. I will not go into detail, but this is the CAMPO policies and procedures. I'll note that this policies and procedures document was last updated in 2007. Not much has changed, but you can expect that staff will bring this back in the next few months to look at and make sure that we're current and we're fresh, and if there's any needed changes that we cover those. So as you review the documents, if you haven't already, I would ask that you keep an eye out in those policies, procedures for anything that you might have questions on, or if there's anything that needs to be refreshed. With that, I will wrap up and take any additional questions you have. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Lucia? Chaz?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Thanks, Lucia. That was a lightning quick summary of a lot of information. Appreciate that.
Anybody else online have a question for Lucia? No? Maxine?
I don't have a question. This is Sandra. I just want to thank you, Lucia, for going through that. I think both new members and existing members, it's always good to have kind of a refresh and a lay of the land of what the responsibilities of the board are. So thank you for that.
You know, one thing I'll add to the new members of the board is that I think we have a very, very competent and qualified staff that takes care of all this stuff. And they always bring their A game to every meeting, and I know I appreciate that. So that's just my comment on this. Does anybody else have a comment? No? All right, so seeing as how that was for information only, we will move on to item 6C for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding Campo's 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. And it looks like Dirk is up.
Good afternoon, Board. Dirk Goring, Senior Transportation Planner for the Carson Area MPO. I'm happy to present the 2050 RTP. So this item is requesting approval for the 30-year Regional Transportation Plan. The RTP is a long-range planning document intended to analyze the regional transportation system network and to identify current and future needs to maintain a safe, efficient, and sustainable transportation system. This plan has been produced by all of Campo's staff. In addition, we've received support from Lyon County and Douglas County and Carson City that has all gone into the development of this plan. On the screen is a map of the Campo area. So the Campo planning area covers the majority of Carson City except for the portion by the lake. It includes the northern part of Douglas County. The boundaries go about 1,000 yards south of the Johnson Lane Road. And then for Lyon County, it includes the western portion of Lyon County, and it goes just a little bit east of Rainbow Drive in Lyon County. So the strategies and the projects that are within this plan are aimed at supporting the 5 transportation goals adopted by the plan, which is to increase the safety of the transportation plan, to maintain a sustainable regional transportation system, to increase mobility and reliability, to maintain and develop a multimodal system, and to provide an integrated system. So public outreach has taken place throughout the plan's development. Outreach efforts have included the following: a 2020 online bilingual survey between April and June. We had about 136 surveys completed. We had a public open house that involved the Regional Transportation Plan Working Group and other governmental stakeholders on July 14th and 15th of 2020. And then we also provided informational presentations to the Campo Board in June, July, and August. This is one of the questions from the survey. It's question number 4. As part of the online survey, participants were asked how satisfied they were with certain aspects of transportation. So I've highlighted in yellow the top 5 where folks were mostly satisfied, and the top 5 really involve the ease of travel. You know, we don't experience a lot of congestion like the larger cities, and folks recognize that and they appreciate it as part of their quality of life. On the bottom of the screen, I've highlighted the 4 that folks are dissatisfied with, starting with driver behavior, speeding in neighborhood streets, and then the condition of roadways and the condition of sidewalks. And please stop me if there's any questions or comments during the presentation. You're welcome to. So over the next 30 years, the demand on the transportation system will grow and evolve. The Carson area is forecasted to have an annual growth rate of a little bit less than 1%. By 2050, Campo's population is anticipated to increase by a total of 24%, resulting in about 105,000 people by 2050. A growing senior population will necessitate investment in safety enhancements to address seniors with diminishing eyesight, hearing, reaction times, and decision-making abilities. Population projections show growth in young family-age cohorts, which include adults between the ages of 35 and 39, and children between the ages of 1 and 9. Young children also have challenges with eyesight, reaction times, and decision-making that pose safety risks when interacting with the transportation network. Campo's 2050 RTP identifies the need to prioritize projects that benefit the most vulnerable users, children and seniors. Required by federal law, regional transportation plans need to perform a system-level cost analysis. So based on a comparison of revenue and costs are outpacing available revenue by about $9.2 million annually, and that number is on a 2020 dollars, and then or $672 million over 30 years. This analysis used a high-level cost assumptions, which were available and consistent across jurisdictions. Included in the analysis was a 30-year cost for the amount of centerline miles of roadways and paved paths, the linear miles of sidewalk, and then the number of MUTCD road signs, such as stop signs, yield signs, and so forth. Staff did receive comments regarding some questions on this table with regards to the annual amount not being multiplied by 30 to equal the 672 million. And the reason for that is because there's about 15 years of inflation costs built into that. 15 years was used as a middle ground of the 30. And so we applied a 3% annual inflation rate for 15 years. And so we've added a footnote on table 5, and we would want that to be included in the motion if the board finds that acceptable. The current and future conditions of the roadway include a transportation system with a backlog of deferred rehabilitation and maintenance projects. Without substantial changes to revenue streams will continue to lose purchasing power. On screen is a chart illustrating 2 of the major reasons why purchasing power is decreasing. Since 1993, the federal gas tax has remained unchanged at 18.4 cents a gallon. The Federal Highway Trust Fund continues to be supported by the Federal General Fund. Over the years, CAMPO's member agencies, Carson City, Douglas County, and Lyon, have implemented different local option fuel taxes, which have been permitted by NRS. Over the past 27 years, construction costs have increased by a total of 131%, and fuel efficiencies for vehicles have increased by 20%, leading to the decreases in purchasing power. Federal law requires MPOs to use performance-based planning. This includes setting quantifiable targets and tracking progress with performance measures. The Federal Highway Administration has set standards for performance-based planning. One category is safety, and that includes 5 performance measures. Another category is infrastructure condition, and this includes 6. These 6 conditions are for the National Highway System, which is interstate and non-interstate, so I-580, US 50, and US 395. And then there's also another category for system performance, and there's 3 performance measures in that. And these are the required performance measures by the federal government. The RTP does go in and drill down and use a few more for the local agencies. On screen is an example of one of the 5 safety performance measures. The chart compares CAMPO's fatality rates with the state of Nevada and the national rate. So the the red line is CAMPO, and you can kind of see we had a small peak in 2014, and then we started declining. Blue it has a higher rate of fatalities, which is the state of Nevada, and then yellow is the national rate. So one thing to notice is that despite the increase in VMTs, which is a chart on the right, which shows an increase in VMTs over the years, despite that increase in VMTs, we're seeing a reduction in the fatality rates, and that's a very good thing. Yeah?
What do you think accounts for that? Why is our miles going up and yet our fatalities are going down? Do you think there's some specific planning that we put in place, something that triggers your mind to this is what did it?
No, it's been hard. A lot of it has to do possibly how people are traveling. And, after the recession, people might, their commutes might have changed from traditional. It's hard. It's something I think we might be able to figure out over time. What makes it harder is that we've also had some major changes to the network, such as the I-580 freeway, which started in 2017. But as you can see, the fatality rates started decreasing before that. We've, the Carson City area, there's been a lot of priority on safety. So, hopefully that there's some benefits there, but it's hard. It's hard to tell exactly. The more we analyze, the more data we get, we might be able to kind of start identifying.
Maybe I can ask it a little bit differently. Did we do specific treatments in high fatality areas. So like, if I'm remembering, didn't we do a project in Lyon County that dealt with, near the grocery store or something, Smith's? Was that a major fatality section? And so did that road improvement actually reduce our fatality rates?
I'm gonna, how to say it, most likely it did. And I guess on your comments, there's been a lot of focus based on the recent federal regulations to identify crash rates and to target projects to improve those. And so your comment on Lyon County is a very good one. It's a very good example. We've also, the freeway extension has also taken a lot of traffic over the years, not just after 2017, but even, over from 2009 and 2005, I want to say, the freeway has moved traffic onto a high-speed facility, which would remove it from your urban roads in which you're dealing with a lot of stop and go and other pedestrians or non-motorized users. And so I think a combination of all those are really leading to it. As part of the RTP, a list of transportation projects has been developed. The list is broken into 4 groups. Projects which are planned to be funded.
Excuse me, Jared, before you go on, I might just offer some anecdotal thoughts on Laurie's question. 2 things, there's motorized fatalities and crashes, and then there's also motorized and non-motorized pedestrians and bicyclists. And I think the city in particular, I don't know about Campo in general, has taken real measures to improve that by actually expanding the multi-use path network. So you're taking steps to separate pedestrians and bicyclists from vehicles. And also, certainly on Carson Street and in some other areas, Stuart, we've identified areas where pedestrian fatalities have occurred on a regular basis at mid-block crossings and put flashing beacons up there. And I think that's this is anecdotal, but I see that as really helping reduce the fatality rate for pedestrians. So I just thought I would offer that to Laurie.
Thank you. As part of the RTP, a list of transportation projects has been developed. It's broken into 4 categories. First category, the group of projects is broken into first kind of 2 categories, and then those 2 categories are broken into 2 each. So first, you have projects which are fiscally constrained, and those projects are planned and funding. Anticipated revenue has been planned for those projects. Then there's projects which are not fiscally constrained, and these are projects that have not been assigned funding. And then those 2 groups are broken into short-term and long-term. Short-term is 2021 to 2030, then long-term is 2031 to 2050. So I've put the list of projects on the screen. I wasn't planning to go through them. There's quite a few of them, but if there's any projects that folks wanted to talk about, I thought it'd be good to have it on screen. So we have Table 18, which shows your fiscally constrained projects in the near term, and we have 2 pages of these projects. And then I have a map at the end too. And then we have projects that are unfunded in the short term, projects that are fiscally constrained in the long term, unconstrained fiscally in the long term as well, and so forth. And so these projects have been identified in the Regional Transportation Plan because they're meeting the goals, and they've been identified by the stakeholders. And so I have 2 maps. One map is of the Campo area, and then I have another map that has a zoomed-in area of Carson City. So that concludes my comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
So,
I have a couple of questions, Greg.
go ahead. You can go first.
Go ahead, Chaz.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Laurie. While we're on Table 18, this is the 10 years. So there's no dates other than the ones that are already programmed for these projects. So are they generally in the order you anticipate actually doing them?
No, I wouldn't say that the list is organized in that fashion. Yeah. So if it's within the fiscally constrained short term, I would say that those projects are more prioritized than the ones that are in the long term or that are unfiscally constrained. But within that list, there's no order.
Okay, so there's a lot of flexibility there then in terms of which ones actually make it into the tip and get constructed.
Correct.
Which is good, I think. I had another question about table 6 in the report, which is the revenue increase options. It was interesting at Mark's acceptance of his little plaque. He mentioned that, you know, we all know we have nowhere near enough money to do what's required, and how are we going to address that? So I guess my question is, will staff be bringing forward some more details on the various options for more money? I mean, whether that's fuel tax indexing or, you know, user fees, VMT, something like that.
I'll jump in there,
Oh,
Member
yeah.
McQuarrie. This is Lucia Maloney, Transportation Manager. Staff are working up, we were asked to work up a presentation to the Carson City Board of Supervisors for funding in Carson City. And that will go to their board retreat in February, tentatively. And if that goes forward, there would be a follow-up item at the Carson City RTC in March or April for funding. But with regard to CAMPO, staff are ongoing, and I think where Dirk was probably going with his response was we look for every opportunity to bring revenue to CAMPO that we possibly can. Staff were in conversations with NDOT just this morning. The state received some funding for COVID, and it's unclear whether they will provide any of that to the locals, but we jumped in there and voiced our concern and our need and hopefully got in line, not to put Sandra on the spot, but hopefully got in line to get some money to CAMPO. So we look at every option for funding.
And I have to say, I've been impressed with what you've managed to do within the constraints that you work. And I'd also like to express my appreciation, because I know a tremendous amount of effort went into producing the long-range transportation plan. And so I appreciate that. Thank you, staff and all concerned. That's all I had.
Thank you, Chaz. Lori?
So if we can go back to the project listing, I would like to have just a further explanation and discussion on project CC1 that deals with 5th Street. We have the Lampa project that is going to be coming online. We have changes coming in the school district, and we have a lot of issues that are going in there. So I'd like to understand, if we have the opportunity tonight, to add into that project, or to clarify on that project, because I don't see it listed there, that we increase the size of the roundabout. It is a health safety issue there, and if we're going to expand the school and have the other issues, that whole area is constrained by one road. And so I just would like to throw this out for discussion, that we have a little more clarity on that item number, that it can include. Obviously, Chaz has some valid points. We've got to look for money and do some things, but I would like us to expand that definitional project to include improvements to the roundabout.
This is definitely possible, and it's up to the board if they want to make that recommendation as part of the motion. Staff can definitely make that change. A little bit of background on the project. This project was identified by Carson City staff, sometimes two different hats, but it was 5th Street was identified as pavement needs out of their pavement management plan, and then also some safety needs out of Carson City's Safe Routes to School master plan. And so that's why it got entered into the RTP as a kind of a larger regional project that, you know, might need some federal funds. And so if that's a recommendation from the board, we can definitely make that change.
Supervisor, this is Lucia Maloney. If I may provide some additional clarification or a recommendation, if that was something we wanted to do, I would recommend we update the description to include language about, it may, something to the extent of it may include capacity or operational enhancements to the roundabout, just so it's clear in there, and that would ensure that that project might be eligible for federal funds or other things like that. And then high level roundabout expansions can cost anywhere from $1.5 to $2 million. And so I would also ask Dirk if it's okay for the flexibility for staff. We can go back after this and just add that in that dollar amount to that project as well. I appreciate the suggestion. It is something that we've had our eye on with discussions from that regional kind of growth that we're seeing in that area. And I tend to agree with you that there's a unique geography there with impacts to that subdivision that would potentially warrant a special look and some unique analysis that we wouldn't necessarily do elsewhere.
And if I can just comment a little bit more general, I think this hits Campo in a different area too. I think it's certainly the growth that you're seeing in Lyon County. And when the traffic's coming in to work in the morning, they use Fairview. So I also see the long-term impact, since this is such a long project period. I'm like, whoa, 30 years. I see that just becoming even more and more usable as a method to move bicycles. We've got some good paths if we would work. I just love the roundabout that was done on Stewart and where the bicycles can get on there and get to the paths properly. I just see this as hitting on all the cylinders that we're trying to do. It hits in the safe routes to school. It hits in the planning for what traffic movement do we need to do. Can we do multimodal? I just would appreciate if the rest of the board would look at that with me and take the recommendation to expand that definition and add the money into this project. That way we can get some potential federal grants and things that can help us achieve this goal.
And one thing to add from the staff perspective is that one of the things to make sure is that the anticipated revenue supports the projected costs. And in this case, there's more than enough revenue from anticipated revenue to support the additional costs.
Any other comments? Right, yeah, ready to entertain a motion?
Let me give one a try. I move to approve Campo's 2050 Regional Transportation Plan as submitted with an update to Project CC1 to clarify the project to include operational and/or capacity improvements at the 5th Street Fairview Roundabout, funding permitted. And then you will also update the costs within the tables appropriately.
Thank you.
Do I have a second?
I second that.
All right, we have a motion.
Before a roll call is taken, sorry, Mr. Chair, would the board be interested in also clarifying the revision to the footnote of Table 5 as described by staff on the record to clarify the solution on that cost?
I'm willing to accept that in the motion for clarity, yes.
I have a comment on the motion, if I may. While we're on this, isn't this one of the projects that's also on the RTC agenda coming up later after this?
It is.
Okay, but since Laurie brought it up, I was going to suggest that currently there's no sidewalk on the south side of 5th Street between the roundabout and Carson River Road. And the comments about the school expansion and making it safer for children, basically, to get there. Another addition to the project that would make sense is to connect the paved multi-use path on Fairview, which just ends into the roundabout, boom, and there you are. Except you can cross Fifth Street and extend that to Carson River Road, where there's a crossing to the sidewalk on the south side of the street to the school. So I think that would be an addition that would make sense to this project too, and definitely increase the safety. So if we're going to amend the description in the CAMPO table 18, might this be the appropriate time to add that also?
This is Lucia. I appreciate that comment, Member McQuarrie. Dirk, if you don't mind, can you pull up that table again with the CC1? So that table, Chaz, if it's okay with you, that description includes complete street elements, and I really appreciate the comment. I think that's something that staff should look at. In my opinion, that complete street element, that captures that sidewalk, and that's certainly something we can look at as part of design. My concern with not changing for the roundabout is that it sounds like, if I'm understanding Mayor Bagwell correctly, that we're talking about capacity improvements at the roundabout, which is sort of a different thing when we talk about federal funding. And I don't think that language covers that roundabout. So staff's recommendation would be to, yes, include the sidewalk in design, but not necessarily needed in the RTP language. But if we wanted to do the roundabout expansion or capacity improvements, they should be described in the description, if that makes sense. But I will defer.
Yeah, I'm okay with that, if that, as long as that gives us that flexibility.
Okay, you good, Chaz?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, we are on to item number 7, board comments. Any member of the board like to comment?
Just in general, I want to welcome the new members to the CAMPO board. It was great to start you off with the 2050 plan. Sorry you started with 100 and some odd pages, but welcome to the board, and I just so look forward to working with each of you. To be like Mark Kimbrough.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm gonna echo those comments. Welcome to the new board members. I look forward to working with all of you. Use me as a resource from NDOT. And I'm particularly happy to welcome John Terry, someone I worked very closely with for a number of years, and he will be a great voice to this board, I think. So welcome to all of you, and I look forward to working with you. Thanks.
Yes, welcome everybody. This is the first change in the board since I've been here for 3 years, so it's interesting to see all these new faces. Okay, so if there are no more board comments, the next meeting is tentatively scheduled for 4:30 on Wednesday, February 10th, 2021, at the Robert Crowell Boardroom, previously called the Sierra Room, if it's done. Is it anticipated to be done? Yeah? Oh, it is? Okay, great. And so that would be at the Carson City Community Center at 851 East William Street. Which brings us to our final public comment. Desi, do we have any public comment?
I see no final public comment, Mr. Chair.
All right. Which brings us to item 10, adjournment. Do I have a motion?
Move for adjournment.
We are adjourned.
RTC will begin at 10 minutes till 6.
Yeah.
I'd like to call the Regional Transportation Commission meeting together, to order. We're all together too, but call to order at 5:50 PM. May I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Bagwell,
Here.
Commissioner McQuarrie,
Here.
Commissioner Shute,
Here.
Commissioner Stedfield,
Here.
Commissioner Terry.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Thank you. Lucia, are there any changes to the agenda that we need to be aware of?
No changes from staff, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, notification for disclosures. I believe Ms. Shute will be giving me a disclosure on 6C and 6D, and I'll do one on 6C. Are there any other disclosures that will occur? No? Okay, thank you. We're moving on to agenda item number 4, which is our public comment period. Desi, do we have anyone on the line for public comment?
We have one caller, Madam Chair.
Okay,
Caller?
go ahead.
It is your turn for public comment.
I'm here. Yes. I would like to make public comment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Would you
Lori,
state
can
your
you hear
name
me?
for the record?
Okay. This is Maxine Neitz. I'm currently chairman of Save Open Space Carson City. I have served on the Planning Commission. I have a degree in civil engineering, and I have been involved in many other public boards and commissions. And I want to make a comment tonight. It specifically relates to the idea that there's going to be a change in the way traffic studies are done. My experience with traffic studies is, number one, most of the new developers are from out of town, and they don't know how people and cars and bicycles get around in Carson City. Number two, the traffic engineers that they hire to do their traffic studies do a very, very, very bad job of it. And what I would like to see as we go forward on this particular items, when you get to 6D, we would all like to see that a city engineer, a city traffic engineer, be a partner with the developer's traffic engineering firm in developing any traffic plans for traffic impact plans for future developments, because these out-of-town people cannot do it by themselves. They don't know nothing.
Okay. Thank you. Is that the end of your comments, Maxine?
That is my comment, yes, on behalf of Save Open Space Carson City. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxine. I appreciate your comments. Do we have any further public comment?
There's no more public comment, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. We will record that against item 6D. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item number 5, which is action for the minutes. Has everyone had a chance to read them? If there are no changes, I will accept a motion.
I move to approve the minutes of the December 9th meeting as they are.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second for the approval of the minutes of December 9th, 2020 as presented. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carried. Thank you very much. Item 6A is discussion and possible action to nominate and elect a chairperson and a vice chair for the Carson City RTC. Ms. Lucia Maloney.
Lucia Maloney, Transportation Manager. Thank you, Commissioner. Staff recommends 2-year terms for the newly elected chairperson and vice chairperson for calendar years 2021 and 2022, commencing immediately. Under NRS 277A 183, the chairperson must be one of the 2 members of the Carson City Board of Supervisors appointed to the RTC. However, any member of RTC may serve as vice chair. And that, I will turn it over to the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any nominations? Mr. Stedfield?
I have one. I'd like to nominate Mayor Bagwell as the chair of the RTC.
Is that for the 2-year term?
It is for the 2-year term.
Okay.
Should I do both at the
You
same
can.
time? And
It's up
I'd
to you.
also like to nominate Lisa Shute as vice chair for the 2-year term.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second. I have a motion and a second to appoint Lori Bagwell as the chairperson and Lisa Schutte as the vice chair for the 2-year term. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. It's a little tiny lag with you guys, but we're going to catch on here. They follow right behind us a little. We're going to move on then to agenda item 6B. This is discussion and possible action regarding support for the planned historic Virginia and Truckee Trail route throughout Carson City. Is Ms. Malone, who's going to take us through this one?
Norman will take this one. Kelly Norman, she's on the phone.
Oh, Kelly's online. Kelly?
Hi, thank you, Lori. All right, if you guys will refer to Exhibit 1. There is enthusiastic community support celebrating the historic Virginia and Truckee Railroad throughout Carson City. The Historic Virginia and Truckee Trail Working Group has been actively working since 2017 to bolster support of the Rails to Trails system following the historic V&T route. This would allow hikers, bicyclists, and walkers to experience the V&T through an expansive trail route system across Carson City. A small portion of this trail in northwest Carson City from west of Western Nevada College south to Ash Canyon Road is currently signed by Parks and Recreation. Staff have been working closely with the Historic V&T Working Group to include the V&T Trail in the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. The Historic V&T Working Group has recently developed a logo and maps to designate routes throughout northern Nevada. The Historic V&T Trail connects from Carson City north to Reno, east to Lyon County on US Bike Route 50, and south along Carson Street to Douglas County. The southern route has a couple alternatives, from Carson Street to Snyder to Bigelow, or from Carson to Clear Creek to Bigelow, or from Carson to Clear Creek to the future multi-use path south of 580. The Historic V&T Working Group has 3 main goals. First, to follow as closely as possible the historic V&T Railroad. 2, to get as much trail on the ground, walkable, and bikeable as soon as possible. Hence the alternatives in the southern part of the route within Carson City. And 3, to link the V&T Trail to larger pathways and trails throughout northern Nevada and California. I would like to introduce you to Donna Inverson of the Historic Virginia and Truckee Working Group, who would like to speak to you for a few minutes about the trail through Carson City.
Thank you. Ms. Iverson?
Lori?
I was going to say I can pinch hit if need be, if Miss Iverson somehow has lost her connection. I do see Mr. Guzman, who probably could pinch hit if necessary. Do we have you,
I'd
Donna?
be more than happy.
Oh, I do see Donna, but yeah.
Okay.
Are you there?
I'm here. Can you
Oh,
hear
there
me?
she is. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for having us. I'll try to keep this as short as possible. I just want to talk a little bit about the history of this project. This was a dream that goes back more than 10 years. But back in 2017, we were accepted by the National Park Services into the Rivers Trails Conservation Assistance Program. And with that, we were able to form a working group consisting of federal, state, and all 5 counties, cities, nonprofit, and private stakeholders.
And that working group came together, and in the last 3 years, we've been able to accomplish a few things. First off was to just develop and agree on a name for this, which is the Historic Virginia and Truckee Trail. And believe it or not, that actually took a lot of work. And then with the RTCA, we were able to develop our logo, and hopefully you have a copy of the new logo, which we're very proud of. And one of the things we're here tonight is to request that you officially recognize our route, and then we're going to be putting up that logo along the route so that people can see it and know where to go. And then we have actually mapped the route throughout the entire V&T route for all 5 counties. And in fact, tomorrow, if you were so interested, you could get on a bicycle at Bigelow and Racetrack Drive in South Carson City near the river and ride the trail following the route from South Carson all the way to City Plaza in Reno and take a selfie with the space whale. We've actually accomplished that much of the route, have it on the ground, ready to go. We've been fortunate so far to be able to piggyback and take benefit of all the hard work a lot of other people have already done, especially here in Carson City. Carson City was the first county to actually recognize and remember the railroad and build the first segment of trail with the V&T behind the college. And then we're taking advantage of all the hard work that was done downtown to put the trail along downtown, Carson Street. And now with the new multi-use path, we're going to take advantage of that and use that as our trail. But now our future goals, Douglas County has the trail marked from the river down to the doors of the new distillery, and they're going after the last 2 easements, and hopefully within the next year they'll be able to link up their complete trail in Douglas County. Then we plan on going after making route improvements both in Carson City County and Washoe County as we go along. Some of those that Kelly mentioned here in Carson City. In fact, next month we hope to make a grant application with CWSD to start the process of a feasibility study for the bridge over the Carson River so that we can connect Douglas County and Carson City County. Then we need to build an entirely new path from the mouth of Carson River Canyon all the way up to Virginia City that won't interfere with the railroad. And our last and biggest and hopefully the best is to eventually acquire the railroad depot downtown Carson City.
Wow.
And so then the benefits of all of this is the path will serve as alternative transportation routes, hopefully, especially once we get the bridge over Carson River. People that live in Johnson Lane area will be able to commute to Carson City to work. People that work in Washoe Valley can commute to Carson City via the trail. Also, some of it will hopefully serve for safe routes to school. But a bigger thing is this will serve Carson City and all of northern Nevada will bring a lot of tourist dollars. Even now, as soon as we start getting the signs up for the sections that we have available from Carson City through to downtown Reno, we'll be able to put the route on the National Rail to Trails website, which will start bringing a lot of people to this area to ride this trail. And even now, that it's not really fancy complete and the whole trail isn't complete. I could foresee once COVID is beaten back, that someone could start this spring bicycle touring outfit that would do a 5-day bicycle tour, which would bring a lot of revenue to Carson City, especially. Let me see if I've gotten everything. 2 years ago, December of 2019, Rails to Trails Conservancy asked me to write a blog post about this project, and I got a lot of really interesting comments. One of them was from someone said, I'd never thought about bicycling in northern Nevada, and now I think I have to put that on my list. And as soon as we get our signs up for the section that we do have done, I'll be writing another blog post.
Great.
And this trail will actually, in Carson City, the Carson City section will share several miles of the Pony Express Trail. I'm going to be reaching out to them pretty soon to see if they would like to bring their signs and maybe add them. And we cross paths with the American Discovery Trail and the Tahoe Pyramid Trail, which the Tahoe Pyramid Trail connects with the Tahoe Rim Trail, and so does the American Discovery Trail. I think the Pony Express Trail does too, which then connects to the Pacific Crest Trail. So all of this will interconnect. So if you have any questions.
Does anyone have any questions of Ms. Inverson?
Oh, I just,
Kelly?
oh, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you, Donna. Again, there are many benefits to identifying this route throughout Carson City, including raising awareness in the hiking and bicycling community, attracting the attention of tourists and Rails to Trails hikers and historians, and encourage the community to get out and explore their region. Staff have been working with Greg Begrin from Parks and Rec and the Historic B&T Working Group on a proposal to the Redevelopment Authority Committee to fund signage along this route with the historic V&T logo that Donna mentioned. And I'd be happy to share that with the board as well. We plan to place 40 signs with the historic Virginia and Truckee Trail logo throughout Carson City. Again, staff is asking for your support for the planned historic Virginia and Truckee Trail throughout Carson City as presented. And I would like to welcome the new board members and would be happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions? So I'll go with one.
Question.
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Terry.
I'm just a little confused. What are we approving? What are we asked to approve here? Just the route and the designation of the route, or she talked about signs. Are we approving the signs, or this is just an action to approve a projected route? I just like a little clarification what we're approving.
I appreciate the question, John. This is Lucia Maloney, Transportation Manager. So there is precedent with RTC approving or supporting route designations for bicycle and pedestrian routes in Carson City. We have Route 6, Route 395. We have these different bike routes. It wasn't required to get that support here, but staff are requesting support of the designation through Carson City to make it official and recognize this. And in doing so, we would start showing it on our maps and be able to, further document, I guess, the partnership between the RTC and these different groups that have been pushing for this concept.
Okay.
So anybody else? Okay, because I think. Oh, do you have something, Chaz? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Madam Chair. It's really a question because really for Donna, you don't show the route going up the Carson River Canyon out east to Mount House. You show it on Highway 50. And on the south end, you've shown the Bigelow route, which may or not be the eventual thing. So I'm just wondering, how locked in are we to the lines on this exhibit when they may change?
I'll add on behalf of staff that there is an acknowledgement that over time, as it's constructed more, that it will adjust. And the goal, as Donna described, is to get it, as aligned as closely as possible with the original, the rail line. So that said, the motion in the packet is to support designation as presented, and over time, that your motion tonight would support that the refinement and that iterative adjustment over time as it's constructed, with the intent to align with the rail.
Yeah, I absolutely support the trail. I just I want to make sure we're not locked into something that we can't adjust later on.
I think we can slightly change the motion to indicate that we're supporting the designation of a planned historic Virginia and Truckee Trail route. Like you said, I think that's a more broad discussion that we want to approve a Virginia and Truckee route, but not the specific route at this moment in time. So I think if we slightly change that motion, we would be perfectly fine, because that's really what my question was. I did not want to do the specific route in case we haven't had an opportunity to really double check everything and make sure it's not going to derail some other project or plan that we have in place, because I know, or maybe it's just me, but when I start looking at all these maps, I feel like I need a magnifying glass, because I got to know what the red means, the purple, the yellow. And so I just want to double check. I have no problem of support for what Donna and Juan and all, wonderful. I just can't imagine. Carson City's just always rocked it and done a great job in the trail system. And so maybe with just a slight change in the motion, I would be very comfortable. So that's my thought. Does anyone else have a comment?
I just have one question, if I could. As part of these proposed trails, one thing I'm always interested in is what happened at this location or what happened at that location. Is there going to be any kind of historic markers that are going to be associated with these routes?
I think Donna can speak to that if she's still on.
Our stakeholders group, as we're working on actually developing a support organization that will be raising funds for just that sort of thing. Historic markers to say, with, photographs of this is what was going on here and things like that along the route.
My name is Juan Guzman, for those of you who do not know me. And I wanted to add that, for example, part of the coalition of the group of members of this group includes the State Historic Train Museum. And they are just delighted with the idea of being able to highlight around the route different ideas. So most of, I would say about half of the people in the coalition are really interested in the history of the train and educating people about it. So yes, it will definitely be one of the things happening as we develop the route.
Very good, thank you.
Do I have any further questions, Ms. Schutte?
This is more of a comment. I just think it's a wonderful idea. I think about the traveling I've done over the years and the girls on our bike trips and bicycle tours and just to learn about the community that we're visiting. And I think it's such a wonderful opportunity to invite that kind of tourism and to really celebrate what Carson City and this beautiful area has to offer. So I love this.
Any further comments? I'll accept a motion if someone would like to give it a shot. Ms. Schutte?
Okay. Yes, I move to support the planned historic Virginia and Truckee Trail route throughout Carson City as presented, with the understanding that the route might change as
So as a potential, you could consider.
okay. So
How about
there's
something along the
potential
lines?
for route change.
Let's try and get where we're going here. Potentially, I move to support a planned historic Virginia and Truckee Trail route throughout Carson City.
That works.
So motion by Ms. Schutte. Do I have a second?
Second.
And the second was by Mr. Terry. Was that you?
No, as me.
Oh, sorry. The lag is just a little interesting in here. So a second by Mr. Stedfield. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you all so very much. And again, Donna, Juan, with you two in charge, I know we're just going to have the best product ever because you're tenacious. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And have a good
Thank
evening.
you.
Okay.
Good night.
We're going to move on to agenda item number 6C, which is discussion and possible action regarding a surface transportation block grant application by Public Works Department to the Carson area Metropolitan CAMPO, I'll just say CAMPO, seeking $1.2 million for the District 3 East 5th Street reconstruction project from Fairview Drive. I'll do my disclosure first, and then if I can have Ms. Schutte do hers. NRS 281A420 requires me to disclose a conflict of interest and abstain from voting when I have a disqualifying conflict. I live within Ward 3, which will benefit from this project. However, this project will not affect me any differently from any other resident of Ward 3. While I make this disclosure, I do not believe that the judgment of a reasonable person in this situation would be materially affected. Therefore, I will be voting and participating on this matter. Ms. Schutte?
NRS 281A.420 requires me to disclose a conflict of interest and abstain from voting when I have a qualifying conflict. My nephew is Chris Martinovich, who is employed by Carson City and will be presenting this item. Chris and I are not receiving compensation of any kind directly related to this project and are not affected by this project differently from any other resident of Carson City. While I make this disclosure, NRS 281A.420 requires abstention only in clear cases, and I do not believe that the independence of my judgment is materially affected by my familial relationship. Therefore, I do not have a disqualifying conflict and will be voting on this matter.
Thank you, Ms. Schutte. Mr. Martinovich, are you going to take us through this item, please?
I am. Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris Martinovich, for the record, Transportation Traffic Engineer with Carson City and the Regional Transportation Commission. So this item is for Public Works to seek approval to submit an application for the East 5th Street project, as mentioned in the description given by Commissioner Bagwell. The item, the project was identified to include a number of elements, which include pavement reconstruction, pavement preservation of different portions of East 5th Street, potential modifications to the intersection of East 5th Street, Hells Bells Road, Carson River Road, which would include the construction of a new right-hand turn pocket into Carson River Road. The project also includes the replacement of the water line between Hells Bells Road and Hidden Meadow Drive, which was identified with coordination with our water utility division. The project also includes replacement of substandard sidewalks and construction of new ADA-compliant pedestrian curb ramps. Lastly, the project will enhance crosswalk safety in the area around Eagle Valley Middle School, which was identified as an area of needed upgrades to enhance pedestrians crossing the street at that location. The project funding and the grant application will support project management activities, design activities, and construction of the project itself. We've identified this project for a number of reasons. First of all, it was identified as one of the 5 major transportation infrastructure projects in Pavement Performance District 3, And this project was approved by the Regional Transportation Commission on September 9th of 2020. Secondly, the project and some of the improvements included in the project are mentioned and documented in our Safe Routes to School Master Plan. As described by that document, there are a number of students who walk from Empire over to Eagle Valley Middle School, and so this project provides some of those safety enhancements to ensure that the people can get from that Empire area over to Eagle Valley. Thirdly, as mentioned previously, our Water Utility Division has identified a need to replace portions of the water line in this area, and so they are contributing $354,000 toward this project as one of those collaborative projects where we can do roadway enhancements and utility enhancements at the same time. And lastly, the Carson City School District is proposing an expansion to Eagle Valley Middle School, which will increase the student capacity. And so we're working with the school district, and there's a traffic impact study that's being developed to identify what improvements could occur. And this is kind of one of those where the right turn lane that was mentioned would come into this. So kind of all that together is the reason staff is requesting approval to submit a grant application to CAMPO for this project. I will mention that the grant will require, these are Surface Transportation Block Grant or STBG funds, and those require a 5% local match. And so we're requesting at this point $1.2 million and a 5% local match would be $60,000. Fortunately, because of the Water Utility Fund contribution and involvement in the project, those funds can be used as the local match. At this time, the total project cost is $1.55 million, and staff is seeking approval to submit an application to CAMPO in response to their call for projects. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and that's it. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may. In light of discussion earlier this evening at CAMPO, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that staff, in preparation of this item, we proposed to request $1.2 million, which is half of what is available to CAMPO in the call for projects. There's 2 years worth of Surface Transportation Block Grant funding available to CAMPO in CAMPO's call for projects. Staff did this because there was an intent and a desire to provide the opportunity to share with the other partners, Lyon and Douglas County. And since CAMPO has gotten into agreement, just a little more background, with NDOT for that portion of Surface Transportation Block Grant that we get, Lyon County has yet to receive any of those funds. They were set to get their apportionment in 2019, or their portion of it, and they were unable to use it at that time. So Carson City took that share, and there was discussion on the record about, if there is an opportunity in the future, they wanted their shot. So we did, as staff, discuss that and proposed to go for half. That said, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that to date, CAMPO staff haven't heard from Douglas or Lyon yet about an intent to submit for funds. So in light of the discussion at CAMPO regarding the RTP and potentially a roundabout expansion, if it was the desire of the board, potentially, RTC could put in for the full 2.4 that's available to CAMPO. This board also sits on CAMPO, and CAMPO would have the opportunity in February to look at all the applications that were submitted, potentially awarding the full to Carson City, potentially awarding half, and scaling if the other partners put in. If you chose to do that, that would give you the flexibility to make that decision later. Alternately, the roundabout piece could be potentially funded in a different way, but I did want to throw that out for your consideration.
Thank you. Certainly, I think that we should ask for the entire $2.4 million because we are expanding the scope and the ideas that I heard from Chaz and everyone else. I think we should ask for the $2.4 million. Then when we sit in the CAMPO, we have the maximum flexibility to make the decision, because if we only apply for 1.2, they're not going to grant us more money, and I don't want to leave money on the table, I guess is the right way to say this. So I am more than happy to entertain doing it at the 2.4 million. Do I have anyone else with a comment or thought? I don't see any.
Yes,
Chaz?
Madam Chair. I concur with your sentiment about the 2.4 million request. And just for the record, since we're meeting as a different board, I would like staff to investigate the possibility of extending the multi-use path along the south side of 5th Street from the roundabout to Carson River Road. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will certainly investigate that, Chaz. You bet.
Okay, so if there's no other comment, I will be happy to accept a motion to increase the grant application to the 2.4 million. Do I have someone? Wants to make the motion? Mr. Stedfield.
I move to approve the submission of the grant application with the exception that we would like to seek the 2.4 million instead of the 1.2.
Okay. Is there a second?
I second.
I have a motion by Mr. Stedfield and a second by Ms. Schutte. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. We're going to move on then to agenda item 6D, which is discussion and possible action regarding options to modify the traffic impact study requirements to address transportation-related impacts associated with development. Ms. Schutte, may I have your disclosure, please?
I would like to enter the same disclosure that I read previously for 6C.
So 6C's disclosure by Ms. Schutte will be indicated on the record that it applies to 6D also. Thank you. So item 6D, who is that you? You're sitting there still, so I'm assuming, are you the staff person for this one too?
I've got this one, yes. Thank you.
Go.
Thank you. Again, Chris Martinovich, Transportation Traffic Engineer for Carson City and the Regional Transportation Commission. So I've got a relatively lengthy presentation, and I'm going to take some pauses in the middle to give us an opportunity for questions. Essentially, we're looking at potentially modifying how Carson City addresses traffic impact studies and how we assess the impact of developments on our transportation system. So let me step through this. Went a little too far, and hopefully the presentation is working on your end. It is. Excellent. So, kind of describe with the staff report, we're looking to provide an overview of existing issues and potential options to implement new or alternative traffic impact study processes to better address and account for transportation-related impacts resulting from development projects. So kind of thinking of this on a fundamental level, we're looking for input, particularly from the RTC in this case, on that balance of encouraging development in Carson City versus having development contribute to our transportation network, an assessment of their impacts that they would have on our transportation network. So kind of the big picture, the RTC provides, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but the RTC provides kind of that vision of transportation in Carson City, and some of the other boards, like the Planning Commission, provide kind of that mechanism for implementing those requirements through conditions of approval. So this presentation here tonight is really focused on kind of that vision of transportation and how development plays a role in meeting that vision. So I'll kind of step through that, but I just want to make sure that we kind of understand that big picture and that kind of fundamental thought. So these are the items here on the screen that I'll be touching on. I'll get a little bit more into the roles and responsibilities of the RTC further down in the presentation. So I want to start off by describing what is a traffic impact study, at least in the terms that we use here in Carson City. So traffic impact studies are written reports that are used to analyze the impacts of development or other improvements to the existing transportation system. They're documents typically completed by professional consulting engineers, which are hired by developers. These consultants typically collect existing traffic information. They generate traffic generated by the development, and they distribute that across our network. And I think during an earlier presentation on CAMPO, we talked about some of the methods they use to generate that traffic, including the travel demand model. And of course, traffic impact studies analyze impacts to the transportation network, both street level and intersection, using industry standard guidance, such as the Highway Capacity Manual, as well as typical software that uses kind of that micro level. It looks at individual intersections and individual movements. So in Carson City, we primarily focus on the roadway network, which is really related to delay and speed. And so we focus delay at intersections, and delay is really measured at intersections, what's called with level of service. and level of service has different thresholds. For simplicity, level of service A is essentially no delay, and level of service F, so A, B, C, D, E, F, is heavy delay where vehicles are confined and they're not able to get through the intersection in a timely manner. On a roadway segment, in other words, between intersections, the level of service is more reported in terms of speed. In essence, if level service A is a vehicle traveling at free flow speed, there's not very many vehicles on the road, it's easy to travel however fast the speed limit allows you to travel. Whereas level of service F is much more congested, you're going very slow, it's very dense, there's a lot of vehicles on the road. So those are the two metrics when we talk about level of service that we look at primarily in Carson City. And I'll touch more about what our code says related to those in a few minutes. So why are we reviewing this traffic impact study? In other words, why are we here presenting to the RTC? Well, essentially, we've identified a number of potential challenges with our current traffic impact study process. And they're listed here on the screen. So the first one really is our current process has a lot of inconsistencies between developments. We have different consultants working on different projects that are showing different results across our network, even for the same roadways. So there's inconsistencies with how the data is collected. There's inconsistencies with how the analysis is conducted, how future years are modeled, and how the results are interpreted. So we have, for instance, kind of consultants using different predictions for growth rate, right? We have our travel demand model that has projections of traffic, but those can be interpreted differently on different roadways. Secondly, we have...
May I ask you a question on that, just so I can
Sure.
have clarity? So are you indicating that that we as the city staff don't provide them the overarching requirements of that project, like assume population of X? You're saying they do that work?
Generally, we provide some guidance on how we want future years to be analyzed, but generally the methodology they use to project future years are somewhat at the discretion of the consultant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question. The next bullet there were inconsistencies with proposed development improvements to existing roads.
Yep, just...
I'm going to switch microphones. We're back. We're back.
We're back. We're back. I was going to say, you haven't talked long enough for your battery to have died.
I know. Yes, so inconsistencies with what improvements staff ask for from development projects, and there's inconsistencies with how existing roads are assessed for each development. And it really varies widely based on the type of development, the location of the development, the existing street condition, and what our current code and the toolbox that we have to use in our code allows. The next bullet there is kind of the cost of traffic impact studies. And so these cost developers money to complete and oftentimes don't really result in a meaningful result. We don't get a mitigation of impact specifically with our traffic impact studies. So they really have a limited use for most types of development in Carson City. And I'll touch a little bit more on this in a second. Fourth one down there is limited opportunity to address other types of impact. So our current traffic impact study process generally does not encourage reviewing other modes of transportation and assessing how those other modes are impacted with a development project. So we do have some current code requirements that talk about an analysis of bicycle being another mode or pedestrian or transit. There's no requirement to mitigate any of those impacts. Our code really only focuses on traffic and vehicular traffic in particular. But we all know that all projects have some sort of impact to the transportation system, whether it's a new conflict with a pedestrian, whether it's a new driveway, which can creates new conflicts with pedestrians or bicycles, there is an impact to the transportation system to those other modes. The fifth one there is traffic studies are capacity focused. So the way our current code's structured and the way traffic impact studies are generally structured, even on a state or national level, is that they're focused on vehicular capacity and primarily vehicular capacity at intersections. And so we evaluate capacity in terms of that delay at intersections, like I previously mentioned. But if a delay at an existing intersection is low, say it's level of service A or B, you have a new development coming in and it has adequate capacity, but now all of a sudden it's level of service D. Per our current code, that's defined as no impact and there's no mitigation required. So you could have a level of service A intersection go to a level of service D, which is 30 to 40 seconds of delay that requires no mitigation to the transportation network. So that's one of the reasons we're focused on capacity. And then lastly want to look for ways to address gaps and inefficiencies in the transportation system. So our current process really doesn't allow us to focus on the kind of the cumulative effect of development. You have multiple developments coming in on a road, goes from level of service A, B, C, D, and then all of a sudden another development comes in and now it's level of service F. And so that one development may have to make all the mitigation and all the improvements from all those previous developments. So that's something we're trying to address and fix that. On the gaps perspective, our current process could potentially create some gaps where we're asking development projects to build sidewalks or half-street improvements or bike lanes that don't necessarily connect to anything. So we have some different items here. And so I want to show a couple of pictures kind of to these last 2 points. So from a capacity standpoint, this here is a map from our travel demand model. And this is projected to the year 2050. And as was mentioned earlier in the CAMPO board meeting, the travel demand model is a method that we use to project future traffic. And so it uses land use and other census information to estimate the number of trips generated and distributed to the network, those origins and destinations. So just looking at the map, green is level of service ABC, yellow is level of service D, orange is level of service E, and then red or level of service F. And so generally, from a big picture standpoint in Carson City, most of our roads have adequate capacity to accommodate additional vehicles even in 2050. You see those highlighted, those red areas, yellow areas, those are along NDOT roads, Highway 50, US 395, I-580, and we have limited availability or limited capability to have NDOT widen those roads just simply because we don't own those facilities. So that's kind of the capacity point. And the last thing I want to mention here on this is the half street. So these are a couple of pictures of some half street improvements that have been requested and are required by our code to be constructed. And so here's one where you've got new ADA components here on the bottom picture that lead into a dirt path. And then the vertical picture there is where half-street improvements were requested and they were constructed. So there's new curb, gutter, and sidewalk, but they don't connect to anything. The street kind of ends. And further, in this particular picture, we've constructed curb, gutter, and sidewalk that a power pole is now in conflict with. So we've created an ADA potential barrier at that location by requesting some of these improvements. So we're looking to kind of correct some of these and figure out what tools we need to change in our code to correct some of this. So speaking of code, I want to talk about what it specifically says. So our current code, Title 18 Appendix Division 12.13, lays out the requirements for a traffic impact study. A traffic impact study is required for any project that generates 80 or more peak hour trips, or the project generates 500 or more daily trips, or as determined by the city engineer, which has been interpreted lately as the transportation division. And so those other elements could be, does the project generate truck traffic? Does it generate other types of traffic, or is it near a critical item, maybe a hospital or a school, where we want to know how that development impacts their operations? But if a project doesn't meet those thresholds, then we don't get a traffic impact study, which means we get no assessment of the transportation impact on the network. What we typically ask for is what we call a trip generation memo, or TGM, which is a document that's signed by the developer's engineer that says, we don't meet these thresholds. It's just kind of the paper trail to make sure we've got the documentation covered. If a development does trigger the need for a traffic impact study, then the developer's consultant would develop this following a scoping meeting with the city. I'd typically sit down with different developments and kind of scope out what intersections we want to analyze and how that process is going to go forward. Once they do that, they submit to the city, we make our comments, revisions as needed, and then it essentially gets filed away. The shelf life of a traffic impact study is about 1 to 2 years. And then there's really no more value because the network has changed, either a result of the development or a result of other developments.
May I ask you a question then? On this slide, are you believing that the TGMs are not always accurate?
No.
You believe that the engineers are doing a good job? The question on this is the first trigger accurate?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, our trip generation memos are based on the ITE, or the Institute of Transportation Engineers, guidance on how to generate trips, and we have a copy of that document. So if somebody says this housing development only generates 5 trips, but it's 80 houses, it's pretty easy for us to go in and check ourselves to know if those real numbers.
Okay.
So I'm comfortable with our method on that. The last thing I'll mention is that our code requires that traffic on all arterials, collectors, and at all intersections should operate at a level of service D or better during the AM or PM peak hours. It does not detail any requirement for individual intersection approaches or legs or individual intersection movements. And it does not provide any need for impact mitigation to any other type of mode. It just talks about they should be analyzed, but there's no need to meet a particular threshold, like a level of service type threshold as a result of an impact. The highway capacity manual does provide some guidance on how to do that, but it's not interpreted or included in our code. The other section of code we're talking about here a little bit is Title 11.12, which is the highways and streets section of our code. And this is the section that allows us to ask for the half-street improvements and to get the frontage construction associated with a development project. And so listed here is just kind of some excerpts from the code, but essentially these are what we use to make sure we're getting construction and developments participating in that vision of the RTC. Are we getting the bike lanes where we identified we wanted bike lanes? Are we getting sidewalks and ADA compliance in those areas where we need ADA compliance, or we want sidewalks as identified in our regional plans? So these are really our two sections of code that we use, and we're talking about potentially amending as part of this traffic impact study process. So I'll touch on that a little bit more in a second. But that's kind of our existing process, and so I wanted to pause here and see if there are any other specific questions related to what a traffic impact study is, what we're doing thus far, and inconsistencies that we've identified to this point.
Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Martinovich?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Mr. Stedfield?
Okay, so what I'm reading here, if I want to do an addition to my house, and I don't have curb gutter and sidewalk in front of my house, I could be forced to put curb gutter and sidewalk just in front of my house. Is that what that's telling me?
I think, yes, that's generally what that's telling you.
Uh-huh. Is that what, in reality, what happens?
It's generally not in reality what happens. It's actually it's a very challenging thing for staff to identify, and it varies with different projects. And this is one of the areas we struggle with. And one of the reasons we're kind of bringing this up is because we're looking to get some guidance from not only the RTC, but the Planning Commission on this, so that we can have a little bit more clarity on when it's appropriate and be more consistent so that everybody knows when it's appropriate to ask for certain improvements.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can comment later on what suggestions we have. Does anyone else have a question on anything that he's brought us so far? Okay. Chaz?
Yes, Madam Chair. Just to clarify the Title 18. So if we're talking about the tentative map, the overall project, I guess, then if that's more than 80 peak hour trips or 500 daily trips, then that's what triggers it right now, rather than a final map that might be just a phase of 10 houses or something.
Yes, and if there's a phase, if it's part of a phased project, we would identify through the major project review meeting, early in the project initiation, that phased projects would be required to provide a trip generation memo or a traffic impact study for all of their phases combined. We don't want a project just breaking up individual phases because they don't want to do traffic impact studies. So we clarify that early on in the project, which is when we clarify all the requirements. It's that major project review meeting that projects come in and the city offers to those developments as to what the requirements, not only for traffic impact studies, but for all types of impact, whether they're water or sewer or whatever.
Thank you.
I have a question. If the project is in compliance with the current zoning, which that zoning is already in the long-range regional model, they still get treated the same as if it was something that was outside the zoning for that area? Does that make sense? Because the regional model already has in projected growth and development in compliance with the regional model. Do you treat them differently if they're not in compliance?
That's a great question, and one I've debated bringing up as part of this presentation. So in essence, you're correct that our travel demand model includes some of those anticipated uses of land based on the master plan and the zoning. So what's commonly happening is that they'll take the information from the travel demand model and they will then add their development on top of that. So we're potentially double counting some of these projects by doing that. And that does one of two things. One, it artificially inflates the impact to the roadway network, but it also potentially washes out any contribution a project may have to a particular pro rata, let's say we have an intersection that the city's identified improvements to, and we want a project to contribute based on a set number of trips that go through there. If they've double counted the background, right, they've got a background amount of traffic, and then they add their own, they've potentially diluted their contribution to that future city project by artificially inflating the background traffic. So we're possibly double counting, and I think oftentimes we are, but it really depends on the consultant doing the work. Some take this into consideration and some don't, but it's one of those identified known inconsistencies that we want to try to work through as part of this process. So I appreciate the question, Commissioner Terry.
Can you, what does background traffic mean? Just clarify.
Background traffic is either the traffic that is already using the particular intersection or the background traffic or the traffic in the future that will be using that particular intersection. It's all the other traffic not associated with this particular development.
Okay. Do you have any further questions? Okay. Please continue. Thank you.
Okay. So I want to move on to some of our goals that we've kind of identified here as part of the reevaluation process. So our first goal, provide development projects a clearer picture of how they participate in transportation improvements. And so we want everybody to have a better understanding of when a traffic impact study is needed and what the requirements, outcomes, and costs will be. We want to give everyone expectations to each development to ensure a more consistent approach. Second one there is, again, back to consistency, ensure consistency of the application of the methodology used to assess and measure the impacts. We want to expand upon the requirements of our code to provide more clarity for a development project on the methodology to be used and when. We want to provide clarity on what improvements may be needed so that we can have a fairer application of these requirements across the city for all types of development. That way we can kind of prevent the last development in having to make all the improvements of prior developments. Third bullet is to provide a framework to offset transportation-related impacts. So as I mentioned previously, an impact is more than just having a project not meeting a level of service D threshold from a traffic standpoint. We want, which most traffic impact studies we get really say there's no impact. Level of service is D or better, and so there's no required mitigation. So we want to have a way to identify those conflicts, like I mentioned earlier, not only for traffic, but for pedestrians, for transit, for bicyclists, that kind of add up over time. We want the flexibility, which kind of leads to that last point there, is allowing for flexibility to make specific improvements that are really needed at a particular location, to focus on that bigger picture. And so the ultimate goal here is to have incremental ways that development projects can contribute and mitigate continued pressure on our transportation network. Either that's through fixing existing problems or working to prevent new ones from arising. So we really just want to encourage other types of transportation by enhancing all of the transportation modes. We want to have safe, predictable, reliable, and consistent transportation network. And that's really why the RTC's involved in this process, is because they provide, like I said, that vision. So what is the RTC's role in the process? Well, in general terms, the top part of this slide is really the RTC's role, big picture. And so that's just kind of for context. But the bottom part here is what is the RTC's role specific in the traffic impact study process? So there's those 4 bullets there. And so the first one is to help identify transportation needs and deficiencies. And this is done through support of the Regional Transportation Plan, which was done earlier, which was approved earlier by the CAMPO board. This is done through the creation of our pavement management plan, our district projects. It's done through approving and implementing our other modal plans, which include like the ADA transition plan, the Safe Routes to School master plan, short and long range transit plans, and even the system management plan that we're currently working on for Carson City. The second bullet there is to provide guidance on transportation policy. So the RTC indicates what we should be building or maintaining and where we should be doing this. The RTC provides guidance on how we spend the money that we receive. The third bullet there is the RTC really ensures transportation improvements comply with adopted standards. And so we need to identify what those adopted standards are so that we can make those, identify those needs that development projects would have to contribute to, or we'd like them to contribute to going forward. And so we want to propose a traffic impact study that allows for improvements that we, the RTC or Carson City, want to see rather than what a developer wants to build because it's easy, or in most cases, building nothing because there's no impact, or at least they show that there's no impact. And the last one there is the RTC will provide input like tonight on this entire process and will provide input on any potential future code amendments that may result out of this traffic impact study reevaluation analysis. So the next slide, real quick, is kind of the big picture of the other organizations involved. And so the bubble there is the RTC I just read through. The top bubble with the Planning Commission, we'll be presenting this to Planning Commission in a couple of weeks. And they're the more, like I mentioned, kind of compliance arm. They're the ones creating the conditions of approval that get implemented and attached to development projects. And so they're an important component to this reevaluation process. And the bubble there on the bottom is really an advisory committee. And the concept with this advisory committee, they're the ones who are really going to dive into the details and flush out the different options and try to identify any additional constraints that staff either don't know about because we're not developers per se, we're not organizations that do this type of work all the time. So they're the ones really going to focus on that. So we plan on using maybe our traffic group that was mentioned earlier tonight, other transportation stakeholders, developers, consultants, organizations, kind of a broad-ranging committee to kind of gather and flesh out what works, what doesn't work, what could work, what are the details we need to analyze. All that will ultimately come up to the Board of Supervisors for consideration and approval of a framework and any code amendments down the line.
Chris, can I ask you then on that before you get into all the different options? The advisory committee that I see on this screen, it's just a question, should the advisory committee be, it's a little difficult for me to try to make a decision tonight without any comments from an advisory committee, if that makes sense to you, that I'm seeing the higher level here tonight, and you guys have done a great job. But when is the advisory committee scheduled? Is that before the Planning Commission? I'm just kind of looking for, or is it something that you see one member from RTC sitting on the advisory, one member from the Planning Commission, and then what is the advisory committee? That's a better question.
Sure, certainly. And I appreciate the question, and I will certainly touch a little bit more on the workflow at the end. But at the moment, I think the advisory committee and its membership, to answer that part first, is totally up for discussion. And if there's a member from the RTC who wants to sit on that, if there's members from the Planning Commission who want to sit on that, they're more than welcome to do that. That really, the individuals haven't been identified, and so people have a stake. They're a stakeholder interested in transportation. I think we'd want their input. As far as a particular timing, the options that I'm going to present, some of them need a lot of analysis, and there's some nuances that would have to be defined in order to understand how they may or may not work on a level specific to Carson City. So I think that we plan to initiate the advisory committee right after the Planning Commission, following, which is a couple of weeks away, and they would kind of identify those details. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but essentially, even if we approve something tonight or recommend an approach tonight, it doesn't necessarily preclude us from going back and saying, hey, these are things we wanted, this didn't work. Our advisory committee didn't like this, we found all these problems, let's go back and try this. We can certainly do that. So that's kind of the idea with the advisory committee, is really get into the weeds of if these options really work or don't work.
Okay. Thank you.
I hope that answered your question. Appreciate that, thanks. So I'm going to get into this. So what are the 5 options that we've been considering to this point? So there's these 5 here listed, and I'll go through each of these. I will say that each of these is being used by some agency in the US, primarily here on the West Coast, and I have done some outreach to those agencies as well as to other consultants, both locally and in the Western US, who work with some of these agencies to get a sense of how they work and if they may or may not be appropriate for us. So I just wanted to kind of mention that. So the first option is called the modified existing process. And really this is just an enhancement of our existing traffic impact study process where the city could play a more active role and provide additional oversight in how traffic impact studies are conducted. We could define additional parameters in our code to account for some of those additional mitigation measures, and that could be all laid out. And so it's really the simplest and easiest approach to implement, and it's very consistent with what we're already doing. So that's certainly why we've considered it as an option. The second option we've called the qualified consultant list. So under this option, the city would develop a list of qualified consultants that we've identified are knowledgeable with Carson City. They understand what we do. They understand our processes, our travel demand model, what we like to see. And essentially developers would pick from that consultant list. They would then hire them and use them to complete their traffic impact studies. Everything else would be very similar to option 1, where the city could play a more active role. But the consultant would kind of have a relationship with both the developer and the city. One of the challenges with this that we identified is that there's a potential for conflict between the city and the developer depending on the results of the traffic impact study. We'd have to kind of work through that. Option 3 is city-completed traffic impact studies. And so in this case, kind of two subsets, 3A and 3B, where the city would complete the traffic impact studies in-house, either by hiring a consultant to do it for the city or by actual city staff doing the traffic impact study. The results of the traffic impact study would be compiled, and those mitigation requirements, should there be impacts, would be given to the developers, and the developers of that project would be required to construct whatever improvement that was identified through the city's traffic impact study. So we would potentially charge a fee for this effort, similar to what developers and projects would pay their consultants. We would be charging for that effort conceptually. I think there's a potential larger risk of conflict with this particular option because you have the city telling a developer you have to build this, and if there's disagreement with that, the developer may end up hiring another consultant, and then you've got three parties involved, and there'd have to be some sort of dispute resolution process worked out as far as this option were to move forward. But it is certainly an option that could be considered. It would definitely give us consistency because the city would get traffic impact studies similar every time, doing them ourselves.
May I ask a question on the conflict that you've indicated on that last one as a con to the option? If the city disagrees with the TIS that was submitted by the developer, do you not still have a conflict? I'm trying to understand, are you indicating they're, what's the right word for this? Cherry picking the vendor that they're using to produce the TIS because they get to produce the results?
I think our current, I don't know that they're cherry picking the vendor. I think the challenge is our current code really limits our ability to ask for certain improvements or mitigations, right? When we have a level of service D, for instance, there's not, if they meet that, then there's really nothing we can ask for beyond that. And so that's where I see the conflict potentially arising. There could be a dispute saying, city, prove to me that this intersection doesn't meet a level of service D, and we provide that guidance to them, and they go, no, we disagree with your methodology used. If we were to do it, we'd get a level of service E or C or something better. And so I see that potentially being a conflict of the methodology and how it's applied. If it's just given to the developer, you must implement this because we've identified that.
Okay, okay, go on.
Okay. Thank you. Number 4 here is a fee collection. So this is where the city would potentially implement a fee for transportation improvements based on a defined schedule or some set of parameters. This is heavily governed by requirements listed in NRS, Nevada Revised Statutes, as to what's allowable and what's not allowable. Specifically, NRS does not allow the funds that would be collected through this to be used for roadway maintenance or for staff time. It has to be for roadway capacity network or network improvements. So we as the city would have to be better at identifying long-range projects that development projects would have to kind of contribute to. So there's kind of two options. They could either just pay the fee or they could construct certain improvements. And so this is kind of what's implemented in Washoe RTC. And so essentially here is the graphic that Washoe RTC uses, where the first line there, if a development has 80 houses, right, single-family houses, then they would pay $4,934.95 per house. And so 80 times 4,034 would be their impact fee on a very simple level. Their process is a lot more complicated, but just kind of dumbing that down, keeping it very simple, direct to how this could be applied. The fifth option we've identified is what we're calling impact mitigation. And so under this concept, a development project would potentially need to offset or mitigate their transportation impacts by choosing from a menu of potential improvement options. And under this concept, and this is one of those like the fee collection that would require some additional analysis, but essentially a development would be required to mitigate all of the trips that are generated. And they could do this by selecting from different types of improvements. And that level of mitigation could be based on project size or project type or project location. That's all needs to be worked out. But essentially under the concept is the development would pick from a different menu of options. And these could be anything from constructing sidewalk, which we may already ask for, or providing half-street improvements, which we may already ask for. And so, or providing other enhancements that maybe improve the transportation system by separating sidewalks. And so this is kind of an example of one of the tools that's been created for this in another agency. So I'm looking at number 4 there, for instance, does the project propose a detached sidewalk on an adjacent street? And so in this case, maybe the development is building in a project that already has curb, gutter, and sidewalk, and there's nothing that needs to be done. But in order to mitigate potentially their trips and fill one of those gaps and address one of those inefficiencies, they could build the sidewalk across the street, thus providing a lot more connectivity to the pedestrian network. So this particular tool here shown on the screen, I think there's 61 questions, and we as Carson City could develop our own questions tailored to specifically what we wanted as we develop that. And that's kind of where the advisory committee would come in, is to identify, could we develop questions? How much mitigation could you get for making particular improvements? So there's a lot of detail that would be fleshed out with this, but it's a concept that allows us to, I think, meet a lot of the goals, but it is a challenge, there's a learning curve, but it certainly would expand our toolbox and give us flexibility for implementing the improvements at locations we really want them to be implemented.
Ms. Schutte?
So the mitigation or the level of mitigation could really be specific to the area that the development would be built. So is that right? So looking at these different options, different developments could potentially have different lists of what they could do to
That's
mitigate.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, that is correct. And that menu would be somewhat selected by the development, right? If they're building in an area without sidewalk, then they could pick as mitigation option, we're going to build sidewalk. And like I said, we may have already asked for that, but now they're getting potentially the credit for doing that without having to do anything additionally. And it really does vary. I mean, residential projects may have different choices than an industrial project. It may not make sense for an industrial project to, for instance, construct landscaping or something, whereas a residential project or commercial project, you may want that buffer of landscaping between the roadway and the sidewalk. So there's some option there, and the idea would be with some guidance at the, again, the major project review level, could be developed, but that's really where we need the advisory committee to kind of weigh in and provide that input. We don't know. I mean, we in staff can guess, but the advisory committee really needs to help flesh out those details.
So may I try to understand this option a little bit clearer for me? So if I am developing a project in our industrial area and the current code says put in a 3-foot bicycle lane, and I've got 100 feet of the roadway, and there is no other bicycle lane, 1,000 feet from me. There's no connectivity. Are you indicating on this that we could toolbox trade and say, that makes no sense to put the bicycle there, but what would make sense is a turn lane? I'm trying to understand, is that what you're getting at? That we're able to get an improvement that makes sense for that particular project area and particular time, instead of a steadfast thing in a code that says, no matter what, you got to put a bicycle lane there, even though there's not a single bicyclist that's going to come to your work? Or is that what you're trying to say, that the development and city staff would work together to try and get the proper improvements specific to the projects, instead of just some things will remain general, but is that what you're indicating, that, oh, hey, there's 20 items here, you
Yes.
generate X number of trips and you need to score 9 points to pass go, but then they could have the laundry list to work with you to score their 9 points or whatever?
Generally, that's correct, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to, because to
Again,
me, sometimes things do not make sense, and that is you're new to the Board of Supervisors, but you will find out very quickly. It's the people that do say, why are you making me build a sidewalk to nowhere? Or why are you, I get that it's in your master plan or it's in a code, but something else would make a lot more sense. Like, hey, I'll trade you this to get that really would be a good addition to that particular project. Because I get a lot of businesses that say, you've penciled me right out. You're telling me I have to do improvements all the way around here. I have to put curbs and gutters in, or I have to put ADA this. And by the time they do their external project for a small remodel, so the remodel was
Greg's
20,000 and the rest of it was 500,000. So anyway, am I getting this right, that it would be a toolbox idea?
It gives staff a lot more flexibility to make specific requests and for developments to implement what makes sense in a particular location. How those details work, I couldn't answer that specifically, but I mean, for your example, in your example, if you have an industrial project that needs to add a turn lane, then it may make sense to add a turn lane rather than adding a sidewalk, for instance, in an area without sidewalk.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anybody got any more? Yeah, I know what Greg's answer at the very end is going to be. Take remodels to a residential out of that piece of the code.
No.
Does anyone, you want to move on?
Yeah, I was
Thank you.
gonna give just a real high level theoretical project, right? So this is just kind of comparing and contrasting each of these different options. So let's say we've got a 40-unit single-family development. This is a very common size that we get in Carson City, specifically even lately. Per our trip generation manual, 40-unit house would develop 448 trips or 42 peak hour trips. So those do not meet the thresholds in our current code, and staff would, assuming that there aren't mitigating circumstances that I mentioned earlier, staff would generally not request a traffic impact study. So when we look at the different options here, options 1 and 2, traffic impact study is not required. The city would probably request curb, gutter, and sidewalk improvements, as well as half-street improvements along that local road, because as it listed down here, the local road has a poor pavement condition and it doesn't have curb, gutter, and sidewalk, but the adjacent street does, so we'd probably make that request. We'd also ask that the internal street for this development be private, or that the city receive compensation for a slurry seal at some point for maintenance facilities. Option 3, the city would probably do a high-level traffic impact study for the nearby intersection or for other concerns, maybe the driveways, and we'd probably give those results to the development. Assuming that there was some sort of impact that we identified, then the development could enter into a pro rata cost sharing agreement with the city to mitigate those improvements. But the process after that with requesting curb, gutter, and sidewalk would still be very similar to option 1 or 2. Under option 4, depending on how it works out, right, and all the methods and thresholds, we probably wouldn't be required to do a traffic impact study. They'd just essentially pay a fee based on those number of units, in that case 40 units at $4,930 using the RTC model, for instance, and that would be applied towards some other capacity project, either right there at the development or in the nearby area as defined by NRS. Again, that's very descriptive in NRS as to what that money can and can't be used for. In option 5, depending on, again, how the methodology is developed, it's unlikely that a traffic impact study would be required, and instead a development would choose what specific improvements they would need to make that mitigation. And in this case, maybe the city suggests, hey, you can mitigate your impacts by constructing curb, gutter, and sidewalk, or you can mitigate your impacts by making your street private or paying us for a slurry. But they'd have those options to do that, and we'd recommend the ones that we wanted. It's for them to mitigate their impacts. And maybe that's enough, right? The tool would have to be flushed out enough to know what those thresholds and requirements are. So I want to pause again. Well, if anyone had any questions, I'll certainly pause. Before I get into the recommendations, I certainly want to touch on why we're making the particular recommendations that we're making. So essentially, we've identified inconsistencies with our current process. We know we have limitations with our current toolbox and our current code, and we want to provide a more clear and transparent method. And so meeting all that, and if we generally want to try to address all those, this is what staff's recommendation was on these processes. And so given that options 4 and 5 need some additional analysis, we'd like to continue consideration of those through the advisory committee and pause on considering options 1, 2, and 3 at this point. Again, doing this doesn't necessarily preclude going back to any of them if we identify a fatal flaw or that everybody's like, oh, this is a terrible idea, or NRS is too restrictive, we can't use the money, whatever. I think there's a little bit more analysis that needs to be done, and we'd like recommendation to move that along. The last thing I'll mention real quick is our our workflow summary here. So we're at the Regional Transportation Commission tonight, plan to go to Planning Commission on the 27th, convene the advisory committee soon thereafter. And again, that group's identified. Compiling those 3 input from those 3 organizations, those 3 groups, we would go to the Board of Supervisors potentially in April and to get some guidance on a potential framework. Following some guidance on the framework, we would flush out whatever option or options were identified, hopefully one, and then move forward to the advisory committee, the RTC, and the Planning Commission, and ultimately the Board of Supervisors for their ultimate adoption and implementation of potential code amendments. So that's the end of the presentation. There was a lot of information there. I realize that. I'm happy everyone listened, made it through with me, but I'm happy to answer any more questions and go from there. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions?
Madam Chair, I have a couple of questions.
Go ahead, Chaz.
So, Chris, under option 4, the fee, which is what they use in Washoe County, do they require, let's just say, frontage improvements that make sense? I mean, you've got a vacant lot and it's got curb, gutter, and sidewalk on either side, but not in front of this development. So do they require curb, gutter, and sidewalk and the fee, or is the fee in lieu of any improvements?
I think, and I'm not positive on this, right? There's different jurisdictions in Washoe County where you have the Regional Transportation Commission, which is implementing the fee for the regional road impacts. And then you have the cities and the county that may have different requirements. So I'm not sure that I can directly answer that, Chaz. I apologize. I can certainly ask, but I don't think I can give you a direct answer on that one.
Well, and I understand that, and that sort of segues into my next question, is that I think it would be really helpful to get feedback from the staff of the entities and agencies that you contacted to come up with these alternatives. Well, particularly 4 and 5, to see how they feel that these methods work, because some some entities may have adopted a system, but then find it's not really what they expected and not be very happy with it. And others may think it's just the greatest thing since sliced bread. So I think that feedback would be helpful when you move forward with taking it to, well, the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors and the Advisory Committee too.
Okay.
That's all. Thank you.
Does anyone
I
else
just have a comment.
Go ahead, Mr. Terry.
Yeah, good. I can kind of see your issue in that really Carson City doesn't have very many streets that are over capacity, and using capacity as your criteria, you're not going to get much out of many of these developments. But we as a agency show our number one goal is safety, and nobody's really come up with a good way to sort of mitigate for safety. And maybe for some of the commissioners, kind of the issue is, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, a new development's proposed that the biggest complaint you hear is that's going to put additional traffic on my residential street and cause, safety impacts to my kids playing in the street, etc. But we really haven't come up with a good way of assessing the safety impacts of pass-through traffic on residential streets and such. And I wonder if at least some of these 4 and 5 give you the ability to have some money to do some mitigations for some of those impacts of developments. But I can see your problem that you really don't have that much of a capacity issue that's over a certain level of service, and that you're not going to get much out of most of these developments, which for the most part aren't that large. So I can see your concern of why you want to change the system, but I don't know as Washoe County's system has been considered all that successful. I don't know. It can add quite a bit of cost to some of these developments.
Thank you. I guess I want to comment in this same arena. So one, the overarching goal, unless I'm missing the step here, you're looking for opportunities to obtain more funding from developers? Is that the overarching goal here?
I think
I will speak for Chris on that one. The overarching goal on this, at least for RTC staff, is to get is for RTC's role and is to give direction to staff from a policy level of how should staff be responding to development impacts on the transportation system. I'll speak candidly in a way that Chris is really good at being professional. I'll speak more candidly here. With option 1, the system was designed, back in the golden days of vehicular travel, and that's just how you looked at things. It's a very traditional approach to responding to development and their impacts on transportation. Option 5 is at the other end of the spectrum. It's maximum opportunity for a city to really look in a very forward-thinking way at multimodal impacts. And that would be consistent with our approved complete streets policy. That said, there is opportunity there to develop something that will take a significant amount of investment. And from Chris's interviews with jurisdictions that have implemented something like number 5, those arguments are of what is more important? How much do we value that extra sidewalk? Or how much do we value an industrial project's contribution to fixing the asphalt, right? Those kind of trade-offs, that will be a tricky situation. It'll require a lot of investment of time with potential maximum payoff in terms of, a comprehensive and improvements toward the system. You as RTC, this question of, well, if we know we're short, however many millions of dollars a year to maintain our system, how much of that, as from a policy level, should come from developments? And that's kind of what we're looking at a staff level, was what is that direction to help us kind of clarify the route we take. And to your question at the beginning, Madam Mayor, related to the order of these things, I recognize we're asking a lot of you in this meeting. And again, I think what Chris said about nothing's precluded here, that was intentional in that we're looking to get kind of guidance on a policy direction before we go to more public stakeholders that haven't been elected or appointed to these boards to then help us implement that direction. So it is iterative, and we'll be back to you if that's helpful, just to kind of tee this at more kind of a higher level.
It is very difficult, even on the policy side, because you have many things that impact. So it's not just the development. You have to look to the side if I make it so expensive for a developer to come here, then they're not going to build any homes. I'm not going to have any affordable homes. So nothing's as easy as just saying, yes, we need more dollars, and I'm going to add a cost of $10,000 per home, then we're not going to have any new homes, and we're not going to be able to mitigate the other issues that we're trying to fix. And so I just see this as a huge picture that needs a lot more fleshing out and work with the other members of the team. And so I'm only hesitant to be giving you a large global answer unless that's all that you're understanding that it is. Because without that advisory group working on this, I'm just not comfortable saying go for, I think option 5, if I understand it lets you work within a framework that, again, I'm just using any generality that, hey, I've got $50,000 to put into improvements in this area. City, where do you want it? Type stuff. You say I want a sidewalk, or you say we want the turn lane. If we're looking to give you maximum flexibility to get the best item that we need for mitigation, I like that idea versus a flat out code that says, hey, no matter what, you got to put a sidewalk, right? I like the option for you to be able to be more flexible and say, I don't want the sidewalk here, I want crosswalks because I want to do safe routes to school. So I think that's more important, whatever. So I'm okay within a general, so long as we're all understanding. I'm not saying to the developers out there that I want to increase your price to develop in Carson City by 10% or 20%. So I need to make sure we're messaging correctly that it's a partnership. And I also want to acknowledge, I think we had a speaker earlier that spoke to this item, Maxine Neitz. And so I think when I listen all the time to them, I don't know that they think the traffic study is again, I think they want mitigations. So I overall like the idea of mitigations, that then the neighborhood could work too on a project. They could come in and say, no, we don't want this, we want that. I kind of like those ideas that the developer, the city, and those impacted by the project could work, could work jointly. So I'm okay with you guys looking at number 5, just don't know how much work and the ability for us to get there. But definitely want the advisory committee working on that. So those are just general comments by me. Does anyone else? Ms. Schutte.
Yeah, just going over the objective of this presentation with the goal of implementing new or alternative traffic impact process to better address and account for transportation-related impacts resulting from development. So I think about development coming in. I think about the neighborhood, how folks are worried or frustrated, or they fear, for the safety of their kids, or the interference of, travel or horses or whatever it is. Different neighborhoods have different impacts. So I love the idea of number 5 because it allows the neighborhood to have a voice in really what is needed. And it's an opportunity to address concerns in a way that they're valid. They're not just the general list of A, B, C, or D, but it's specific to that community. And each development will have a different list that is specific to that community. So while I anticipate a lot of work, I also think, just as you were saying, the opportunity for really what's gained can be huge, and it really can be win-win, which could lead developers to want to come to Carson because of a little more flexibility.
Does anyone else have a comment? No?
Yeah, Madam Chair. So the
Yes.
proposed motion doesn't say, go with any number. It just says directing staff to continue investigating the traffic impact study options. And so I think that might address your concern. We're not committing to any particular one at this point. We're just directing them to do more investigations.
I agree with what the proposed motion indicates. It just says keep working on it, which they could come back to us with the advisory committee's comments, which to me would be, I'm going to switch hats or wear multiple hats also, but I like the idea that I need the information from the groups before I could really step on one of these options and say that's the answer. So is staff okay with just it being general that you're moving forward versus you were looking for a more as on the record? Are you okay with just the general keep moving forward and bring us back answers from the advisory committee?
Let's fast forward to April. So in April, in theory, if we go along this schedule, staff will bring back takeaways from this meeting, from Planning Commission, from the Advisory Committee, and when Chris comes back to you or I come back to the Board of Supervisors in April, we'll summarize this meeting, and correct me if I misheard, that there was discussion about acknowledged need for developer contribution, though not necessarily more contribution than they contribute now, but an agreement on the need for clarity and consistency in the goals that Chris discussed. There was direction to continue looking at the options shown on the slide with option 4 and 5, but to not rule out the other options if 4 and 5 were deemed, infeasible or for whatever reason by the stakeholders, and that then we will pursue we were directed to continue to pursue the work program with that schedule as on the slide, and then we'll continue to build on that with those other meetings. So that's kind of how I would characterize the discussion so far, unless I've missed anything.
Is everyone comfortable? Is there anything else we need staff to consider that would be on the record? I'm looking at you. And you can put on the record if you want to talk about residential improvements. Because I think it is a time to actually discuss those things. It's not really maybe technically in our wheelhouse because that's a code, but I do think that on the record it should be looked at. Do we want to have a new house that just they're adding, expanding to a 2-car garage,
They're adding a back deck.
right?
I will also, if I may,
Yes.
push it on you a little bit. Are there any options 1 through 5 that you would say to staff, please don't pursue this option anymore? We don't want to go there as RTC from a matter of policy. We don't want impact fees, or we don't want to do, this qualified consultant list. It sounds weird, or anything like that. And it's okay if not, but I will ask.
Does anyone have a particular objection to any of the recommendations? So everybody's agreeing that everything can be looked at?
I would say 3 is a bad idea.
I was
Three
just
is the
gonna
one
say
you
the
want
same
out? You want 3 disqualified?
I agree as
I just think
well.
it's a bad idea.
Yeah, me too.
I agree.
Okay,
That puts the city in a bad position.
yeah. So we're all in agreement that number 3 should not be continued.
Correct.
Okay?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I'm ambivalent about that. I would point out that it's actually the system that TRPA uses for a lot of their review for development in the basin, but that may not be a very good recommendation for.
I was going to say that pretty much seals it there, Chaz.
So I think I'll leave that one where it is.
Thank you, Chaz. Okay, so do you have enough information that we can just, we can go ahead and accept a motion then? Chaz, do you want to make a motion?
Yeah, sure. So I move to direct staff to continue investigation of the traffic impact study options and to proceed with the proposed work plan as discussed on the record, and to focus on, and to not go ahead with option 3, but do 1, 2, 4, and 5.
Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you so much. Great job and a
Thank you.
in-depth discussion tonight. Very good. We're going to move on to, and thank you, Mr. Martinovich, for your presentation. We're going to move on to agenda item number 7, and we'll start with the transportation manager's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will start by just welcoming the new members. I will acknowledge that this was a heavy agenda. We don't always cover topics this technical, this in-depth, this far-reaching, and so I appreciate your patience and engagement on this agenda tonight. Before Chris stands up, if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, I did want him to give an update on my behalf with regard to snow cones, and not cherry or grape snow cones, but transportation-related snow cones, if that's okay with you.
Sorry, I heard that. Yeah, I'm like, what? Never mind. Yes, that's perfectly fine.
Thank you.
So the control systems operations manager, James Jacklett, is working on installing some snow occlusion devices on some of our traffic signals. So he's purchased, I believe, 60 devices, and they're plastic devices that get attached to our traffic signals, and they're cone-shaped. And essentially, they'll go on red signal heads, the red light. And if we had a snow event, the snow will essentially not block the red color signal. Sometimes we get some wind events here in Carson City, and the snow will blow into the signal heads and block the lights. Now that we've gone to all LED traffic signal lights, instead of the old incandescents, the snow no longer melts, and so that totally blocks the color of the signal. And so by putting these cones on, you'll at least be able to see a portion of the red light. And so we've identified some particular intersections in Carson City and some particular movements at those intersections where we're going to be installing these devices on the signal heads. So you'll see those going up here. I think they've already started installing them. I just wanted to mention that.
And how much do those cones cost?
I don't know off the top of my head what that number is.
Oh, okay. But you are saying that the public might, instead of seeing the full circle of the red, they might see a half moon.
They would see a half
So we might get some
red.
phone calls telling us that our red lights aren't working, but that's a great thing to put out in the public, that, like you said, in a snow event, it may only be a half red. Okay.
Yes, when there's no snow, they look kind of weird, but the whole red is still visible. But it's really for when snow happens. And I can follow up with James on the specific costs of those if you'd like me to.
Thank you.
Low-cost safety improvements to address cold light bulbs with new technology. Thank you, Chris, for pinch hitting on that. I also wanted to give you an update on items we're working on for next month. So this meeting this evening was very policy-heavy, big picture. Next month, you'll hear us come back with more capital project updates. Specifically, staff have been working really hard on corridor study for Colorado Street. If you've driven on it, it's huge and wide. You could land an airplane, and there's a lot of concerns and a lot of competing uses of that street. We have a lot of driveways, there's safety concerns. So we've done 2 rounds of outreach, and Dirk Goring will bring back an update on what that outreach kind of resulted in that will inform design of the project. I announced this last month as well and jinxed it. I'm going to do it again, so my apologies, Chris. We've gotten confirmation from Central Federal Lands that we will hopefully finally get the 95% design for the Kings Canyon project. We're hoping to bring that next month. Chris is mad that I jinxed it again, but we'll hopefully see that. I will wrap up this manager's report by saying that staff can't do this alone. Transportation is innately personal. How each of us travels on the network really impacts our perception of how the system is working. And so we rely on the public to let us know what's not working, where the issues are, and we really rely on our RTC board members to bring the issues that they're hearing. What is the public saying? Where should we focus? So our doors are always open. Just I would encourage you to reach out, ask questions, help direct us. If you want informational items, we're happy to bring all that forward. So please consider the door open.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 7B, which is our street operations activity report that's in your packet.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 7B is a report that comes to you monthly. This is the street operations activity report as of November 2020. So these were activities conducted in November. The template for this is the same every month. And you'll see in that middle column, street operations activities. The big ticket items that occurred in November were sidewalk and flat work. You'll start seeing that really will die down as snow gets on the ground, or if it does this year. Fall cleanup, there was a lot of cleanup this time of year, right, in November. And curb mile swept, sweeping activities was all high. And that's generally what I'll touch on is kind of the high ticket items for that month, but I'm happy to go into detail or answer any other questions.
Does anyone have any specific question on item 7B? No? We're good there. Okay, then we'll move on to 7C, please.
7C is the project status report, so I'll just kind of run through some of these relatively quickly. The first one here is our South Carson Street Complete Streets project. This one is very near completion, and so they're still waiting to do some landscaping items, and the frozen ground kind of limits some of that ability. And there's a few other last-minute lighting items as they come in from the orders, then they're installing them. But it's been a relatively slow process due to manufacturing and shipping delays to get that infrastructure in here and installed. But most of the project has been completed. The freeway multi-use path to Colorado Street.
Did it come in on cost and under cost? Where do you see that one?
I believe it's going to come in cost. I don't know if Lucia knows more, or if, but I think we're on.
Big project, so how did we do?
That's correct. We did great. Dan Stuckey managed it, oversaw it with Tom Grundy, and they did a very good job.
So we made budget?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, good answer. Okay, thank you.
Sure. The free multi-use path to Colorado, this project is essentially completed. There is some final hydro seeding to be done once the weather warms up a little bit, just to secure our slopes and prevent them from eroding. But other than that, we're working to close out the project and pay the final invoice on this one. Path is open. The freeway multi-use path to Edmonds, this is from the end of the Colorado one down to the Edmonds Sports Complex. We've reached the 60% design phase, and those plans are going to be going to NDOT here any day now. We did identify through consultation with NDOT some historic research, historic preservation research for some cultural items that we're going to coordinate with NDOT on them, and that effort has probably delayed the construction about a year. And so we're working with NDOT to mitigate those cultural issues. On the Kings Canyon Trailhead project, I'll give an update on this next month. I'm 99% sure they're going to give us something that we can talk about, so we'll provide more of an update on that. Roop Street Rehabilitation Project. This project was to provide some improvements between 5th Street and Musser by the sheriff's office there in the courthouse. Due to some staffing challenges and other priorities for some of our projects, we've moved this out a year, and so we'll delay design a little bit and get construction the following summer, next year, 2022. Fairview Drive Rehabilitation Project. This project is complete. SNC has done all the work. All the punch list is complete, and we're working to just close out the project and pay the final invoice. This may be the last time this one shows up. It just depends on when the invoice kind of comes in for that final number. I want to make sure we report those. The Airport Road Utility Replacement Project. This project is complete with the exception of striping in US 50. NDOT has been, and the weather has been finding that commonality. We have to do the striping during certain times of the day and on certain days of the week. And the weather has been difficult to find that common time. And so we're working on doing that. That's the only item left on this project. The Airport Road CDBG ADA project, this project is complete. All the invoices have been paid. The project's functioning, all work is done, and this is the last time we'll see this one. I'll pull this one off for next 2 months.
Can I ask on this one? So does that mean you said all invoices were paid? So it was
Yep.
209,785, and we had budgeted 227. Is this one on a grant?
This is CDBG Community Development Block Grant Funding.
Yeah, so does that mean we left block grant money on, or can we apply?
I'm not specifically familiar what happens with that little bit of extra money. If maybe Dirk, if you wanted to chime in, if we could certainly do that.
Because I'm picky on roads.
I
want to use every penny.
I can answer that. So
Okay.
the funding that was left over from this project got rolled back up into the city's pot to be reawarded on the next project. So the city didn't necessarily lose it, as I understand, but we did give it back to the pot for this project.
So there was time left on to allot for this spending.
There was
on
a
this
small,
grant.
that's correct.
Thank you.
The next project is the Northridge Drive Pavement Reconstruction Project. This was awarded at the December board meeting, and we plan on constructing in June. District 2 Long Street Project, we've reached 60% design. Those plans will be circulated internally for our review. Plan to construct later this summer. District 2 Telegraph Project, this one has generally been completed. We're waiting to install the RRFB at the Rapid Rectangular Flashing Beacon at Carson Street. I'm understanding that came in and is just to be scheduled and installed here in the next few weeks, is my understanding. Other than that, the project is essentially complete. The Robinson Area Sewer Project, while primarily a sewer project, there are some regional transportation funds applied to it. They are at about 70% design, and they're anticipating completing in the springtime with construction again this summer. Colorado Street CDB project, we'll hear about this one hopefully in February as well, about some of the outreach activities. I will note that we completed the geotechnical analysis, and that report should be coming in probably next week, and that'll give us some guidance on what we can and can't do with the existing pavement out there. So that'll be an important report. 2 new projects, the District 3 Deer Run Road Pavement Preservation Project and the District 3 Clear Creek Road Pavement Preservation Project. These are both Type 3 modified slurry pavement preservation projects, and they're just getting kicked off. We've started design, and these are relatively straightforward. We anticipate completing these in a couple of months, getting out to bid and awarding at the RTC potentially in April or May for construction this summer. So that concludes the project status report. I will note that if with some of the new board members want any additional clarification on any of these projects or some of our other ongoing projects, I'm happy to help answer any questions or provide any clarity. Or if you have any suggestions on what we should be reporting or not reporting on these sheets, I'm open to those suggestions as well. Otherwise, I'm finished. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much. Again, nice job. We're on our board comments, agenda item number 8. Does any member of the board wish to put a comment on the record? Anything? Just you had a good time tonight? Oh, Ms. Schutte.
I just want to thank the staff. You know, I've reached out with questions, and I really appreciate everyone's willingness to answer questions and to be available. So thank you, and I really look forward to serving on this committee. Thank you, or commission.
Mr. Terry, I just want to say welcome and thank you for all your great comments tonight. Look forward to working with you, and Ms. Schutte's right here next to me, so I've already thanked her personally, and Chaz, as always, thank you. Anything else? Okay, our next meeting then is scheduled, obviously right after the CAMPO meeting. We will meet in the new Robert Bob Kroll boardroom. So that will be wonderful. You guys will be excited, I'm sure. Is there any final public comment, Desi?
I see no final public comment, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So then we are on, who wants to do it? Anybody want to make a motion for us to adjourn? Okay, we're adjourned. And again, thank you all.